My name is Steve Rogers. If you're hearing this, I guess I finally stopped running long enough to talk about the beginning. Not the uniform, not the missions, not the flag, just the kid beneath all of that. The kid I used to be before I became a symbol, before the world turned me into something more than human. Before we dive deep into my story, please consider liking and subscribing, as it not only supports the channel, but helps more people to discover my story. Also, you will get updates on more stories from others who fought beside me shoulder to shoulder. Now back to my story. It's strange. People see the shield, and they assume I've always been strong, always brave. But that's not how it started. It started with weakness. It started with silence. It started with a boy who never fit. I was born on the 4th of July, 1918. Brooklyn, New York, right in the heart of a city that never really made room for people like me. Too loud, too fast, too tough. The streets were always moving, and I was always getting pushed aside. I was small, really small, fragile, the doctor said, underweight, asthmatic, sick more days than not. I couldn't run far without coughing. Couldn't climb the stairs without wheezing. Couldn't go a week without someone looking at me like I was a problem that couldn't be solved. But I was stubborn. I think I came into the world stubborn. That much at least, I was born with. My father, Joseph Rogers, died when I was very young. Mustard gas, they say. He served in the Great War. Came back coughing and never really stopped. He didn't leave behind much, just his coat, a watch, and a quiet that settled into our home like dust. My mother, Sarah, was the strongest person I've ever known. She was a nurse, worked double shift, came home with tired eyes and aching feet, but never let me feel like I was a burden. She read to me when I was too sick to get out of bed, made soup from almost nothing, held my hand when the nights got bad. She kept going, even when there was nothing left to give. She taught me what it meant to stand for something, not with words, but with quiet endurance. I didn't have many friends. Kids didn't want to play with the boy who always had a handkerchief in his pocket and couldn't keep up during tag. But Bucky was different. James Buchanan Barnes. He lived 3 blocks over, and somehow, despite everything, he always had time for me. He never made me feel weak, never looked at me with pity. He treated me like I belonged, even when I didn't believe it myself. He was faster, stronger, better look, and he had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered. But with me, he listened. He didn't need to protect me, but he did, and not just with fists, though there were plenty of those. He protected the part of me I didn't know how to guard yet, hope. I got into fights, a lot of them. Never won. Didn't stop me from trying. Bullies would pick on anyone smaller, and that meant me, or someone else like me, and I couldn't stand it. Couldn't walk away. Every time someone bigger shoved someone smaller, something inside me burned. Even when my legs shook, even when my fists curled and I knew I didn't stand a chance, I still stood up. And every time they knocked me down, I got back up. Not out of pride, out of principle. Because if I didn't stand, who would? Then came the war. The second one. You could feel it brewing in the newspaper, on the radios, in the way people looked over their shoulders like they knew something was coming. When it started for real, when Hitler invaded Poland, it was like the world exhaled and realized it had been holding its breath for years. And I knew in my bones I couldn't sit this one out. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I believed it had to be fought. I tried to enlist, over and over again, and every time the answer was the same. Rejected, too small, too weak, too damaged. My file must have been a mile long. I changed addresses, used fake names, slipped into recruitment centers like I was sneaking into a movie. I knew the risks. I didn't care, because every time I saw the footage of what was happening overseas, the camps, the marching, the fear, I thought of my mother. I thought of how she taught me to stand when it hurt, and I knew I couldn't be the kind of man who sat back while the world broke again. And then, someone noticed. A doctor, short, round, glasses, quiet voice. His name was Abraham Erskine. He didn't look at my file and laugh. He didn't scan my chest or test my reflexes or roll his eyes. He looked at me, really looked, and he asked, "Do you want to kill Nazis?" I answered, "I don't want to kill anyone. I just don't like bullies." He smiled like he'd been waiting years to hear someone say that. That was the beginning, not of the hero, not of the myth, but of the choice. The moment when I stopped trying to be strong for the world and started becoming strong enough to change it, not with hate, not with rage, but with purpose. And it all began with a boy who couldn't stay down, and a doctor who believed that was enough. They called it the Strategic Scientific Reserve. It didn't sound like much at first, just another government acronym, another attempt to build something behind the curtain. But when I stepped into that facility, when I saw the doctors, the equipment, the eyes watching me, I knew this wasn't another dead-end enlistment attempt. Something was happening here, something bigger than me, bigger than war. And for the first time, I wasn't being laughed out of the room. Dr. Erskine introduced me to a man named Chester Phillips. Colonel, no nonsense. Every word felt like a decision. He didn't like me, didn't try to hide it. To him, I was a joke, a liability. He said I'd break the moment someone looked at me the wrong way. But Erskine stood by me. He told the colonel, "You don't win wars with muscle. You win them with courage, with heart." He said the serum they were testing, this thing that could turn an ordinary man into a symbol of hope, it had to be given to the right person, not the strongest, not the fastest, but the one who knew weakness, who knew loss, because only someone who had known powerlessness would respect power. I was chosen, me, not because I was exceptional on paper, but because I wasn't. Because I had stood up when no one told me to, because I had nothing and still chose to fight. That terrified me, because I wasn't sure if I deserved it, but I knew I couldn't walk away. So I agreed. I let them take my blood, let them measure my pulse, my nerves, my reactions. They ran me through exercises, drills, interviews, put me in with the other candidates, soldiers, athletes, men built like tanks. They mocked me at first, but I kept going, even when I couldn't breathe, even when I could barely keep up. One day during a training exercise, Colonel Phillips threw a dummy grenade into the middle of our group. Most of the candidates scattered. I didn't think. I jumped on it, curled my body around it, bracing for the end. It was a test, a fake, but I didn't know that, and that was the moment the colonel stopped doubting me. He looked at me, almost stunned, and Erskine smiled, not because I was brave, but because I'd proven without powers, without a serum, that I was already the man they were hoping to create. The day of the procedure came fast. They brought me to a secret facility tucked under a Brooklyn storefront. Howard Stark was there, yes, that Stark, younger then, confident, always fiddling with something mechanical. The chamber looked like something out of science fiction. Wires, glass, tubes, humming with potential. They strapped me in. Erskine checked the levels. Howard gave the all clear. And then, they began. Pain like I'd never felt before. Fire in my veins. My bones grinding under pressure. My muscles twisting, expanding, burning. I could hear shouting, dials turning, Howard yelling to increase voltage. I thought I might die, but I didn't scream. I clenched my teeth, locked my jaw and held on, because I wanted this. I needed to become more. And then light, silence. The hatch opened, and I stepped out, taller, stronger, heavier, different. My body had changed, yes, but the real change, it was in how they looked at me. Suddenly I was a possibility, but not everyone was happy. A HYDRA agent had infiltrated the program. He shot Erskine, right in front of me. The man who had believed in me, the man who had given me this chance, died in my arms. I chased the agent down, fast, too fast. I ran through streets like a bullet. My new body hadn't settled yet. I was clumsy with it, raw. But I caught him, barely, and when it was over, when the dust settled, the crowd didn't cheer. They stared, like they couldn't decide if I was a miracle or a monster. Erskine was gone. The serum was lost. His formula died with it. And I was the only one, the sole product of a dream that ended in blood. They didn't know what to do with me after that. I wasn't assigned to a unit, wasn't put on the front lines. Instead, I became a mascot, a symbol for war bonds, a dancing monkey in tight. Captain America, they called me, with a bright shield and a smile painted across my face. They sent me on tour, made me punch fake Hitlers on stage, read scripts, sell war stamps. Crowds loved it. Kids waved their flag. But at night when I peeled off the suit, when I stood in front of a mirror that showed a man I didn't recognize, I felt hollow, because I hadn't come here to pose. I had come here to fight. Then I heard about Bucky. He'd been captured. His unit had been sent behind enemy line. Most declared dead or missing. Command wouldn't approve a rescue. Said it was too dangerous. Said I wasn't a soldier, just a symbol. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to ask for permission. I was going to. They told me no. They told me to stay where I was, safe, clean, polished. Told me it wasn't my place to run into a war zone, that I wasn't trained, that I wasn't part of any official military unit. But Bucky was out there, and if I waited, he wouldn't be. So I didn't wait. I found Peggy Carter in the mess hall. She already knew. She always knew. She was in uniform, calm, collected. Every word precise, but behind her eyes I could see it. She wanted to act too. I suppose asking for clearance is off the table, she said. I nodded once. That's right. She looked down at the folder in her hands, then back at me. Good. I wasn't planning to ask either. We went to Howard Stark. If anyone could get us across enemy lines without asking questions, it was him. He didn't blink when we told him, just grinned, tossed me a helmet and fired up the plane. Try not to die, Rogers, he said over the roar of the engine. Plane's expensive. We flew low over the Alps. The clouds broke just enough to show dark ridges of mountains, jagged like teeth, and tucked inside them, barely visible, a HYDRA base. Lights too sharp for any outpost. Flares, spotlights, patrols. But I wasn't scared. Not then, because fear had already passed through me. What was left was purpose. I jumped without hesitation. No parachute. The drop was sharp, fast. My boots hit rock and snow, and I ran, through the trees, toward the fire, toward the base. I didn't have a real weapon, just a borrowed sidearm and a prop shield from my Bond tour. The one that wasn't even vibranium, just painted metal, but it would have to do because I wasn't there to look the part. I was there to bring them home. I breached the base from below, found a vent shaft, climbed through cold steel tunnels lit by red emergency lights, the sound of boots above me, marching, shouting, machinery, and then voices, American voices, prisoners. I reached the cells and knocked out the guard before he could raise the alarm. The look in the soldiers' eyes when they saw me, they couldn't believe it. Is that Captain America? I thought you were just a show pony, one of them said. I pulled open the bars. Not today. We moved fast, opened every door, pulled every man out. HYDRA soldiers scrambled to respond. I fought hard, didn't hold back. I didn't have to think about the punches anymore. My body knew what to do. One man rushed me. I threw him across the hall with a swing I barely felt. Another aimed a rifle. I blocked it with the shield, knocked him cold. Strength like this. It was new, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a promise. a responsibility. I found Bucky last, isolated, strapped to a table, weakened, eyes unfocused. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched. Then he saw me and whispered, "Steve." I smiled, relieved. "Come on, Buck. Let's go home." We fought our way out together, side by side again, like we were kids back in Brooklyn. Only now, the stakes were bigger. Now, the fire was real, and this time I had the strength to carry both of us. We made it out. The prisoners, the soldiers, Bucky. I led them through the woods, over the ridge, and just before dawn we crossed back into Allied lines. The reaction was chaos. I was supposed to be dead. I had disobeyed direct orders, vanished behind enemy lines, but I returned with dozens of men, injured, dirty, exhausted, but alive. And something changed that day. I was no longer just a symbol. I was a soldier. They gave me a unit, called us the Howling Commandos. Dum Dum Dugan, Gabe Jones, Jim Morita, Falsworth, Montgomery, Bucky, of course. We weren't a normal squad. We were different. We were built for the impossible. Hit-and-run raids, sabotage, extraction. Where HYDRA set up strongholds, we tore them down, one by one. They gave me a real shield, too. Vibranium, light, unbreakable, perfectly balanced. Stark's design, of course. It felt right in my hand, like it had been waiting for me all along. We hit HYDRA bases across Europe, tracked Red Skull's movements, disrupted weapons caches. They called us ghosts, said we moved faster than news could travel, said we turned the tide in places no one else could reach. And maybe we did, but behind every victory, there was a shadow, because I could feel it building. Something bigger, something darker. Red Skull, Johann Schmidt. He was more than a general, more than a fanatic. He was HYDRA's heart, and he had the same serum flowing through his veins, but it twisted him, turned him cruel, vicious. He believed humanity was weak, and that only the chosen should rule. He called it destiny. I called it tyranny, and we were on a collision course. We captured maps, interrogated agents, found clues, and eventually, we found his final plan. A bomber, massive, loaded with weapons beyond anything the world had seen, headed for the United States. I knew what I had to do. There was never a question. The team helped me board the craft mid-launch. I fought my way through, took the controls, and when I realized I couldn't disable it, that if it crashed millions would die, I made a call. I radioed Peggy, told her I wouldn't be home for the dance, told her I had to put it in the water. She didn't cry, she didn't beg, she just listened. That's who she was, that's why I loved her. I aimed the plane for the coldest part of the ocean, and I crashed it, alone. I remember the cold, how it wrapped around me, slowed everything. Heartbeat, breath, thought, and then, nothing. Just ice, just silence, just time froze. The first thing I felt was light. It didn't make sense at first. Not warmth. Not yet. Just a presence. Something brushing against my skin, pulling me from the dark. Sound came next. Muted. Muffled. Like I was underwater. Voices that didn't belong to anyone I remembered. Too fast. Too clipped. The wrong rhythm. My eyes opened slowly, and I saw the ceiling. White. Fluorescent. Clean. Not the cockpit. Not the ice. Not heaven. A hospital room? No. Too perfect. Too still. Something was off. I sat up. My limbs moved, but it felt like they belonged to someone else. They responded, but not quickly. Like I was waking up in a stranger's body again. The door opened. A woman walked in. Military uniform. Soft expression. She smiled politely. "You're safe, Captain Rogers." She handed me a newspaper. The date made my heart skip. 2011. Not a typo. Not a dream. 90 years. 90 years in the ice. I noticed the details. The music on the radio. Glenn Miller. Wrong year. A setup. I stood up. Tried the window. Fake view. They were trying to ease me in. I couldn't take it. I pushed past her. Broke through the hallway. More doors. More clean white walls. And then open air. City streets. Not the New York I remembered. Too many lights. Too much glass. Screens on buildings. People in clothes I didn't recognize. Phones. Noise. Horns. Everything too fast. They surrounded me. Shield agents. Helicarriers above. Nick Fury in the middle. He looked me in the eye and said, "You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years." And I said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. I was alive, but everything else was gone. The world had moved on. Victory dances turned into history book. The howling commandos scattered or buried. Bucky gone. My mother long passed. Peggy, they took me to see her. She was in a care home. Gray, fading, still beautiful. When she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Steve," she whispered. I nodded, my throat thick. "I promised you a dance." I said. She smiled. "Then dance, Steve." But a few seconds later she forgot. She blinked, looked at me like a stranger, and I felt my heart break for the 100th time. They gave me an apartment. Small, bare, quiet. They said I could take my time, adjust. But how do you adjust to a world that forgot you? To sidewalks paved over your memories, to maps, with countries that didn't exist when you went under. I would walk the streets of Brooklyn, looking for ghosts, for old buildings that hadn't been torn down. Most were gone. Some were shells, shadows of what used to be. The diner where I first met Bucky, now a bank. The street where I saw my mother come home late, now a parking lot. It was like time had eaten everything. I made a list. Things to learn. Internet. Star Wars. Marvin Gaye. Nirvana. Thai food. Fury told me I needed to catch up, but I wasn't sure I wanted to, because every new thing felt like a goodbye to the old ones. SHIELD brought me in slowly. Debriefings. Tests. Training. They said the serum had preserved more than my body. I still remembered things with perfect clarity. Could still move like I hadn't missed a beat. But my heart, that was slower, heavier, wounded. Then came the Tesseract. Then came Loki. Then came the team. They called it the Avengers Initiative, Earth's last line of defense. And I was the man out of time, a soldier from the past, thrown into a war he didn't understand. There was Stark. Tony. Arrogant, brilliant, loud, too much like his father but nothing like him at all. He didn't care about rules, didn't understand sacrifice, or maybe he did, and hated that he did. Banner. Kind eyes, quiet voice, a storm wrapped in hesitation. Thor. A literal god, and yet, somehow I understood him. War changes people, even immortals. Natasha. Sharp, cold, but not really. And Clint. Steady, watchful, always ready to disappear when needed. We weren't a team. We were pieces, scattered, damaged. But when Loki brought war to New York, when the sky opened and monsters poured out, we found each other. We became something more, not because we were ready, but because we had no other choice. The battle was chaos, aliens, explosions, fire. I gave orders, not because I wanted command, but because someone had to. They listened, not because I was the strongest, but because I knew what war felt like, what loss tasted like. I led them through it, and we won. Barely. But after that, I didn't celebrate. I sat alone, in my apartment, suit folded, shield propped in the corner, and I stared at the photo of Peggy on my dresser. The dance we never had, the life I never lived. The war might have ended, but the fight inside me, it never. People think the hardest part is the war, the battle, the blood, the heat. It's not. It's the quiet that comes after, the stillness, the part where no one's shooting at you, and suddenly you're left with nothing but the sound of your own breath, and a world that doesn't recognize your face. After New York, SHIELD kept me close. Briefings, assignments, small missions that felt like tests more than trust. The modern world was fast, too fast. Files were digital. Surveillance was constant. Enemies didn't wear uniforms anymore. They wore suits and smiles. There were no trenches, no front lines, just shadows. I kept going, because that's what I do. Mission after mission, building after building, one takedown at a time. I trained. I ran laps around DC. I read every file they gave me, but I couldn't outrun the ghosts, couldn't outpace the question that haunted every reflection. What am I fighting for now? Then came the Lemurian Star, a hostage situation, another mission, but it felt off. Too clean, too planned. I completed the objective, neutralized the threat, but when I looked deeper, I found something darker. Files being stolen, encrypted data pulled in secret. I confronted Fury. He told me not to worry, said it was classified, but I knew that tone. I'd heard it in the eyes of men who were about to betray everything. That's when I met the Winter Soldier. No name, no face, just speed, silence, precision, metal arm, mask, eyes like ice. He moved like death, not a man but a weapon. We fought hard. He matched me, strike for strike, faster than anyone I'd ever faced. He threw me off a bridge, shot Fury, almost ended us all. But it wasn't the fight that shook me. It was the moment his mask cracked, and I saw his face. Bucky. It hit like a grenade. His eyes older, harder, colder, but still my best friend, my brother, back from the dead, or not back, just taken, twisted into something unrecognizable. SHIELD fell apart not long after that. HYDRA had grown inside it like a parasite, dormant, patient, poisonous. They'd been hiding for decades, infiltrating, waiting, planning. Project Insight was their weapon. 3 helicarriers armed with smart targeting. A plan to eliminate threats before they acted. Preemptive slaughter, the kind of thing that men like Schmidt would dream up, and it had Fury's signature on it. Natasha and I burned it all down, fought our way through the corrupted hall, exposed secrets, turned SHIELD's files loose into the world. Truth as a weapon, a flood of light. But in the end, it came back to Bucky. He confronted me again, on the helicarrier, blow for blow, steel arm against vibranium, and I wouldn't fight him. Not really. I let him hit me, let him bleed me. I looked into his eyes and told him, I'm not going to fight you. You're my friend. And he hesitated, just long enough. He saved me, pulled me from the wreckage before I drowned. Disappeared into the woods. After that, things didn't get easy. The world knew who I was now, knew what SHIELD had become, knew who Bucky had been. I became something else, not just a soldier, not just a symbol, but a man hunted by history. I tried to find him, traced whispers through Europe, searched every shadowed file, talked to every source who'd ever spoken his name. Some said he didn't exist, others said he was unstoppable, but I remembered the boy who stood with me in every alley, the hand that pulled me from every beating, the laugh that made the world feel okay for just one more day. That boy was still in there. I had to believe that, because if HYDRA could take someone like Bucky, they could take anyone, and I refused to let that be the end of his story, or mine. Sam Wilson came into my life around that time. A soldier, a counselor, a man who understood grief. He didn't try to fix me, didn't ask questions. He just ran beside me, listened, and slowly, without even trying, became one of the few people I trusted. We built something real, not a team, a partnership, the kind that doesn't need medals or uniforms, just purpose. There was peace. Briefly, a breath between battles. I tried to live in it, tried to find moments where the world wasn't falling apart, but with men like us, peace is never permanent. The next storm always comes, and this time, it would come not from outside, but from within. It started with a bombing. Vienna, a peace summit, diplomats, leaders, the future of global cooperation in one building. Then fire, debris, screams, and the flag of Wakanda draped in smoke. The world needed a villain. They found one. They said it was Bucky. Surveillance footage, explosives traced to him, witnesses who thought they saw a ghost. But I knew better. I'd seen the real Winter Soldier, not the headlines, not the mask, the man behind it, the one who'd saved my life when he didn't even remember me. I knew there was more to it. The Sokovia Accords were already on the table. They weren't new, but now they had momentum. Fear does that. People wanted control, wanted to put leashes on us, on the Avengers. Tony supported them. He believed in structure, in regulation, said it was the only way forward, and maybe he was right. Maybe, but something in me couldn't sign. I'd seen what blind orders could do. I'd followed them once and lost everything. I couldn't do it again. They wanted me to stand down, wanted me to let them take Bucky, lock him away, call it justice. But I remembered the boy in Brooklyn. I remembered his hand reaching for mine when I was bleeding in an alley. I remembered him saying, "I'm with you till the end of the line," and I knew where I had to stand, even if it meant standing alone. I found him first. Bucky. He was confused, panicked, but not violent, not unless he had to be. He didn't remember the bombing, didn't know how they'd pinned it on him. And then, they came. The world, Special Forces, SWAT, Black Panther, T'Challa. He was quiet, regal, lethal. He wanted justice for his father. He didn't know Bucky, didn't care, and I didn't blame him. His grief was fresh, his rage, righteous, but I couldn't let him take Bucky, not without the truth. We ran, we fought, and they caught us, dragged us to Berlin in chains, treated like criminals, like fugitives. But while we were locked down, the real enemy moved. Zemo. He wasn't HYDRA, not exactly. He wasn't trying to take over the world. He just wanted it to tear itself apart. And we gave him everything he needed. He broke into Bucky's cell, used a sequence of words, trigger phrases, and just like that, I lost him again. Not Bucky, the soldier. He burst out, brutal, unstoppable. I tried to stop him, tried not to hurt him, but it was like fighting a hurricane. He escaped. So did I. With help. Sam, Clint, Scott, Wanda. Not a team. A family fracture. We went off-grid, because Zemo was headed north, to a HYDRA base in Siberia. Said he wanted to wake more soldiers. Super soldiers like Bucky. Frozen. Deadly. Waiting. We had to stop him. But Tony followed us. He had every right. I hadn't told him the truth. I didn't tell him what the file said, what S.H.I.E.L.D. had buried, that Bucky had killed his parents. Zemo didn't unleash a new army. He didn't want more war. He wanted us to destroy each other, and it worked. Tony saw the footage, saw the Winter Soldier cold, mechanical choke, the life from his mother, smash the wheel of his father's car. He snapped. I don't blame him. He wanted blood. Mine. Bucky's. Both. The fight was brutal, not flashy, not cinematic, just raw, desperate. We destroyed each other in silence, metal on metal, shield on repulsor. Every strike was heartbreak, every blow a sentence we couldn't take back. And in the end, I dropped the shield, walked away, because I didn't deserve it. Not if it meant using it to break someone I once called brother. I took Bucky and found refuge in Wakanda. T'Challa. He changed. He chose mercy, chose healing. He offered Bucky rest, cryo sleep, until the programming could be undone. I let him go. watched the pod close, and it felt like goodbye all over again. I sent a letter to Tony. No excuses, just the truth. I told him, if you need me, I'll be there. And then I disappeared. No rank, no uniform, no nation, just a man carrying the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. The world kept turning, without us, without me, but peace never lasted. And the next war, it wouldn't come from Earth at all. After Berlin, I vanished, not to hide, but to breathe. There's a difference between running away and stepping back. I wasn't afraid of the fight, but I was tired of swinging without knowing who I was hitting. We went underground. Sam stayed close. So did Natasha. Wanda needed rest. Clint went home to his family. Scott tried to go back to normal, whatever that meant. And me, I watched the world from the shadows, helped when I could, stopped the worst of it, always moving, never still. I became a ghost, a myth, not Captain America, just Steve. It wasn't peace, but it was quiet, long enough to forget what war tasted like, long enough to believe we might get through the cracks without falling apart. And then, a ship. In the sky, Thanos. His name had been whispered before. Off-world threats, celestial politics, gods and monsters fighting in corners of the galaxy I'd never see. But now, he was here, and he was coming for something we didn't understand. The stones, infinity, power beyond anything we'd faced. Bruce came crashing back, literally, through the roof of the sanctum, gasping warnings. Tony heard first, then Strange, Wong, Wakanda, Vision. We were all scattered, all fractured, and Thanos didn't care. He moved like a wave, unstoppable, cold. We regrouped, sort of, not a full team, but enough. Vision was in Scotland with Wanda. We went to get them. Wanda was stronger than ever. And Vision, he was in danger. The stone in his head, one of 6. Thanos was collecting them. We brought him to Wakanda, because it was the only place left strong enough to defend something sacred. T'Challa welcomed us, not as fugitives, but as warriors. He didn't ask about the past, didn't ask for apologies. He simply said, "We don't fight for one life, we fight for all of them." And we prepared. I led an army again. It felt strange to wear the suit, to carry the shield again, even if it was different now. Wakandan built, sharper, angular, still not the one I left behind in the snow, but when I strapped it to my arms, it felt like coming home. The battle came fast. Alien beasts, screams, explosions in the trees, shields clashing, guns firing. Wakanda roared, and we held the line, side by side. Thor arrived like a storm, with Rocket, with Groot, his hammer gone, now replaced by a weapon of lightning and loss. We fought like brothers, and still, it wasn't enough. Thanos came, walked through the battlefield like a god among dust. Nothing stopped him, not Banner and the Hulkbuster, not Rhodes from the sky, not Okoye, not Bucky. He made it to the tree, to Vision. Wanda tried to stop him. She killed Vision herself to protect the stone, tears running down her face, hands glowing with grief. And then, Thanos rewound time, brought him back, and ripped the stone from his head like it meant nothing. I ran toward him, one last shot, one final punch. He looked at me, and I pushed with everything I had, but he didn't even flinch. He raised the gauntlet, and snapped his fingers. Silence, not thunder, not fire, just silence. Then dust. Sam, gone. Bucky, gone. T'Challa, Groot, Wanda, Doctor Strange, Peter Parker, gone. I fell to my knees, watched the ash drift through the air like snow, and whispered, "Oh God," because what else do you say when the universe dies in front of you? There's no sound like the quiet that comes after loss. Not just absence, but the echo of what used to be there. Laughter, traffic, voices behind windows, whole cities with their volume turned down. That's what the world became. Muted, hollow, half full. After the snap, after Thanos, there was no plan, no orders to follow, no battles to fight, just silence. People tried to move on. Some did, most didn't. We had meetings, support groups, circles of strangers sitting in metal chairs, staring at coffee that had long gone cold. They talked about dates that never showed up, jobs that didn't matter anymore, beds that felt too big, and I listened. Because I didn't know what else to do. I told them to hold on, to keep going, that we had to believe in something better, but every time I said it, I felt like I was talking to myself, because I didn't know how to believe anymore. Natasha didn't stop working. She built a new network, kept tabs on what was left of the world. The Avengers were shadows now, floating faces on flickering screens. Rocket, Nebula, Carol, Okoye, Rhodey, half a team, half a purpose. We held the pieces together, barely. Some days I ran, just ran, miles through empty neighborhoods, down past fields of overgrown grass, past playgrounds filled only with dust. I ran because it made sense. One foot in front of the other, movement, progress. Even when everything else stood still, I visited Peggy's grave, more than once. I'd sit there in the early morning, watch the light crawl over the headstone, and try to remember her voice. I couldn't, not clearly. That broke something in me I didn't even know was still whole. Then, 5 years in, Scott Lang showed up at the gate, alive, confused, desperate, and with him, an idea, the quantum realm, time, not travel, not exactly. He called it a time heist. I called it a miracle. We brought everyone in. Tony was the hardest to convince. He had a daughter now, Morgan, a life he didn't want to risk. But in the end, he came back, because that's who he was. No matter what he said, we planned, studied, mapped every infinity stone, every point in history, and we split into teams. 3 stones in New York, 1 on Morag, 1 in Asgard, 1 in 2014 Vormir. I went with Tony and Bruce, and Scott, back to the Battle of New York. It was surreal, watching it from the outside, seeing myself move through it, younger, louder, less tired. We got the Mind Stone, the Time Stone, almost got the Space Stone, but Loki, he escaped, caused a ripple we didn't expect. We needed another shot, so Tony and we went deeper. 1970 Camp Lehigh, where it all started. I saw my old uniform, old photos, old files, and her, Peggy, through a glass window. She was just feet away, talking on the phone, smiling, and I stood there, frozen again, not by ice, but by what could have been. I could have knocked, spoken, said anything, but I didn't, because it wasn't time, not yet. We got the stone, barely. Tony met his father, had a moment he never thought he'd have, and I saw something soften in him, something he never showed before. Maybe he was healing, maybe we all were. We came back, stones in hand, banner snapped, and for a moment, birds chirped. The world breathed again. Then Thanos arrived, not the one we knew, a younger one, angrier, hungrier. He brought everything, his army, his ship, his rage. The compound exploded, rubble, fire, screams, but we rose. I stood, bloodied, bruised, shield cracked, and I faced him, alone. He smiled, thought it was over. Then, Sam's voice in my ear. On your left. Portals opened, one by one. Wakanda, Titan, New York, Sandar. They came back. All of them. Peter, T'Challa, Bucky, Strange, Hope, Wanda, everyone we lost. They came back, and we stood together, not as heroes, not as gods, but as people, fighting for each other, fighting for everything. We won, but not without cost. Tony, he made the final call, the final snap, his hand in the gauntlet, his eyes locked on Thanos. I am Iron Man, and then light, then ash, then silence. We held him, watched the life fade, not just from his eyes, but from the space around him. The world grew quiet again, but this time, it was sacred, earned, paid for in. The battlefield was quiet now, not silent. There's a difference. There were still distant murmurs, still the sound of boots over broken ground, still cries of victory and grief tangled together. But in the space where Thanos had stood, there was nothing but wind. I stood near the riverbank, blood on my knuckles, dirt across my face, the shield strapped to my arm, cracked down the center. The man who carried it was tired, but in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt still. Tony's funeral was beautiful, small, private, a floating wreath, a quiet dock, his arc reactor resting where his heart used to be, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. No speeches, no uniforms, just people, family, those who knew him, those who loved him, even when he made it hard. Morgan clutched Pepper's hand the whole time. She didn't cry. She looked up at me once, those wide brown eyes, and nodded, like she understood something the rest of us couldn't. And maybe she did. Kids are strange that way. Afterward, we gathered one last time. The stones were back, the gauntlet destroyed, but the universe, it needed balance. Bruce, Sam and I stood by the platform. We'd rigged the quantum GPS. I volunteered to return the stones, one by one, to the exact moment they were taken, to restore what we'd borrowed, to fix what we'd fractured. Bruce said it would only take 5 seconds from their perspective, just 5. But for me, I knew it would be longer. I stepped onto the platform, shield in hand, heart heavy, but hopeful. They asked if I was ready, and for the first time in my life, I said yes. I traveled far, to worlds I'd never seen, mountains where gods kept time, planets that had burned and bloomed again, back to Vormir, where silence echoes like loss, back to New York, 2012, to return the Mind Stone. I passed my younger self in the hallway. He didn't see me. I was just another shadow now. And finally, back to 1970, she was there, Peggy. Not a photo, not a memory, not a ghost. Her hair was darker than I remembered, her laugh still the same. She stepped out of an office, talking with an aide, and I knew this was the moment. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. I took a breath, then stepped off the platform and didn't come back. Bruce panicked. The platform stayed quiet. 5 seconds turned to 10. Sam looked at Bucky, confused. Then Bucky turned his head toward the lake. There I was, old, not broken, just full. They walked over slowly. Sam stared at me, eyes wide. You gonna tell me about her? I smiled. No, I don't think I will. I handed him the shield, polished, restored, heavy in his hands. Feels like it belongs to someone else, he said. I looked at him, saw the man beneath the hesitation. It doesn't. The rest of the world moved on without me, but I didn't need it anymore. I had finally laid down the fight, not out of defeat, but because I had finally earned the right to stop swinging. Peggy and I bought a small home in the suburbs. White fence, garden in the back. Slow mornings, I mowed the lawn, read the paper, danced with her in the living room. She ran shield, quietly, effortlessly. I stayed out of the spotlight, out of time. I didn't need the world to know I was back. She did. That was enough. Some nights we talked about the war, not for long, just little things. She'd say, "Did you know you always looked so serious in your photos?" And I'd say, "Only because I was trying not to sneeze." And she'd laugh, soft and free. I never forgot the others. Tony, Natasha, Bucky, Sam, Wanda, Clint, Bruce. They were part of me, always. But their stories kept going. And mine came home. Years passed. Decades. I held Peggy's hand as she faded. She looked up at me one last time, eyes soft as ever. "Thank you," she whispered. I told her, "No, thank you." And then she was gone. I buried her in the cemetery beneath an oak tree, left a single rose, and walked home alone, but not lonely. Sometimes I sit on the porch and watch the sun fall over the hills, and I think about a skinny kid from Brooklyn who just wanted to do the right thing, and how far he came, how far he ran, and how in the end, he got to stop running. I write sometimes, not for anyone in particular, not to be read, just to keep the wind company. Pages filled with thoughts too quiet to speak aloud, memories folded into the lines, moments I don't want to forget. Sometimes they're letters, other times just sketches, a name, a street, a scent. Brooklyn in the rain, the clang of a punching bag, the way Peggy's lipstick always tasted like cinnamon, the sound of Bucky laughing before either of us knew what war smelled like, the way Sam's wings caught sunlight just before he hit the clouds. I keep them in a box beside the fireplace. Some days I take one out, read a line or two, then slide it back in. Not because I'm trying to relive the past, because I'm trying to thank it. There's something sacred about stillness. It doesn't come easy, especially when you've spent most of your life bracing for impact. I used to sleep with a knife under my pillow. Now, I sleep with the window open. Let the crickets sing. Let the wind carry the old echoes where it wants. A boy passed me on the street the other day. Had the same walk I used to have. Back straight, chin out, too small for his jacket. He looked up at me. I smiled. He didn't recognize me. Good. The world doesn't need Captain America anymore. It needs people like him. People who try. People who care. Even when it's hard. Especially then. Sometimes I dream of the ice, of the cold pressing in. But in the dream, I'm not afraid. I'm floating, weightless, and I see stars above me. Not weapons, not wars, just stars, and they're quiet. I see Tony sometimes, not really of course, but when I close my eyes, I hear his voice, sarcastic, quick. "Nice job, Roger. You finally learned how to sit still." And I laugh, because I did. Took me a few decades, but I got there. I imagine what it would have been like if things were different, if Bucky hadn't been taken, if Peggy and I had never parted, if the serum had never worked. Would I still be that kid on the corner, drawing comics on napkins, watching the world pass by? Would I have found peace sooner, or not at all? Regret is a strange thing. It doesn't scream, it whispers, soft, persistent, but not cruel, more like a question you never quite answer. I have regrets, of course I do, but I also have something else. Time to forgive myself, to sit with the silence, to understand that being a hero was never about being right. It was about choosing to stand again and again, even when you don't know if it will matter. Especially then, Sam sends me updates. He's good at the job, better than I ever was. People trust him. He talks to them like neighbors, not like soldiers. That matters. He carries the shield now, but more importantly, he carries the heart. Bucky found his way back. It wasn't easy, wasn't fast, but I saw it happen. The way his eyes stopped scanning the exits, the way he started to laugh again, real laughs, not the ones that end in silence. I don't need statues, don't need holidays, don't need museums filled with my picture. I just need to know the world's still turning, that kids still ride bikes in the street, that someone out there still believes in something better. That's enough. That's all it ever was. If anyone ever reads this, if some piece of this gets found, years from now, I hope they understand, this wasn't a story about war. It was about choice, about people, about holding the line when no one else will. One last letter. I think this one's for me. Dear Steve, you did enough. You stood tall when it mattered. You loved when you could. You forgave more than most, and you learned slowly, stubbornly, how to be gentle again. You made it to the end, and you earned your rest. Now breathe, close your eyes, and let it go. Love, the kid from Brook. I thought peace would be louder, that it would come with fireworks, brass bands, maybe even relief. But it didn't. It came like a whisper, like something that didn't want to be noticed. And for the first time in my life, I let it stay. After I came back from the past, after I'd lived the years that time had taken from me, the world didn't recognize me anymore. Not because I was older, but because I was finally at ease. I moved slower, smiled more, let the shield rest where it belonged, in someone else's hands. Sam had it now. He doubted himself at first. Most good men do, but I knew what I saw in him. Not just courage, but clarity. The kind that doesn't need a suit or super serum, just conviction. Still, I had questions, not about the world, about Bucky. Wakanda had done what no one else could, not just unfreeze his body, but help unfreeze his mind. The programming, the words, the triggers, they lost their power. He told me that for the first time in decades he could sleep through the night without waking in a sweat, but he still looked over his shoulder, still moved, like someone waiting for permission to exist. I visited him in Brooklyn. He was staying in a small place near Prospect Park. No cameras, no fanfare, just a bed, a punching bag, and too many empty coffee mugs. When I knocked, he didn't answer, but he didn't have to. Come in, he called through the door. I stepped inside. We didn't hug, didn't cry. We just sat. Two men carrying the same war in different directions. He poured coffee, still used the cheap stuff, said it tasted more like the past that way. I asked him how he was doing. He gave me the look, that flat one, that means don't ask questions you already know the answers to. I nodded. We sipped, and after a while he asked, "Do you ever stop hearing them?" I looked down at the cup in my hands. No, but they get quieter. He told me about the dreams, not the bad ones, the strange ones. Fragments of memories that didn't belong, conversations he'd never had, missions he'd never taken, flashes of HYDRA facilities, frozen mountains, names he didn't recognize. He thought the programming might have left scars deeper than even Wakandan tech could reach. Sometimes, he said, I'm not sure if I'm me, or just what's left of me, and I told him what I should have said years ago. That's enough. You are enough. We went for a walk through the same neighborhoods we used to race through as kids. A few things were still the same. The corner deli, though it had new owners. The old fire hydrant we used to play stickball next to. Even the street signs felt familiar. like ghosts frozen in metal, but the people, different, new voices, new rhythms, and maybe that was the point. The city moved on, and so could we. We didn't talk much on that walk. Didn't need to. That's the thing about brothers. You don't always need to speak to be understood. At the corner of Union and 3rd, he stopped, said, "This was the first place I ever got into a fight." I laughed. "I remember, you were 10, the other kid had 20 pounds on you." He smirked. "And you jumped in anyway. You had the better footwork," I said. "You had the bigger heart," he said back. And that was it. A quiet moment, a shared scar, another page closed. We sat on a bench, near the river, watched the sun dip behind the skyline, the kind of orange light that makes the whole city feel like it's glowing. He turned to me, eyes a little glassy. "You think we did enough?" And I said, "I think we kept trying. That's what matters." He nodded, then smiled, a real one I hadn't seen in a long time. When we stood to leave, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Don't go getting old without me." I raised an eyebrow. "Bit late for that, but..." He laughed, and for the first time in years it wasn't heavy, it was free. There are things I carried longer than I should have. Memories, sure, scars, old regrets. But the one that always had the most weight was the shield. Not because it was heavy, not physically, at least. Vibranium's strange like that, lighter than steel, stronger than anything on Earth. It catches the light like a mirror, feels smooth, indestructible. And for most of my life, it was my answer to fear, to injustice, to chaos. When words failed, when the ground shook, when the world spun out of control, I raised it. But after Thanos, after the dust had settled and the silence returned, I held it in my hands and didn't know who it belonged to anymore, because I was tired. Because I'd finally tasted what peace could feel like. Because maybe, just maybe, there was someone else who could carry it better now. Sam never asked for it. He never reached for it. Never treated it like a prize. That's why I knew he was the right one. Because he understood. It wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. About standing when others sat. About leading without asking for applause. I remember the morning I gave it to him. We stood by the lake. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the sky was starting to fade from black to blue. He didn't know I was coming back. Not like that. He expected me to return through the machine, young, unaged, untouched. Instead, I walked out from the trees, older, softer, still me. He looked at me, eyebrows furrowed. "You want to tell me about her?" he asked. I smiled. "No, I don't think I will. Not because I didn't want to, because that part of my life, the one with Peggy, it was mine. After so many years of giving every part of myself to the world, I needed one piece to hold quietly." I handed him the shield. He looked down at it like it might burn through his glove. "This feels like it belongs to someone else," he said, and I told him the truth. "It doesn't." He tried to argue, said he wasn't ready, said the world wouldn't accept it. Said he wasn't a super soldier, didn't have the serum, didn't have the name. But I saw something in his eyes, the same thing Dr. Erskine saw in me all those years ago. Not strength, not speed, not perfection, just goodness. A man willing to do the right thing when it's hard, when it's unpopular, when it hurts. I saw myself in Sam, but I saw something better too. A man who didn't need the past to define him, who could walk forward without dragging the ghosts behind. He would build something new, something cleaner, something real. Later I heard what happened, that he gave it up at first, that he doubted him, that the world questioned him like it always does. But I wasn't disappointed, because I knew what it was like to carry something too heavy too soon. I knew that sometimes, the hardest part isn't lifting the shield, it's believing you deserved. when he finally picked it up again, when he put on the suit, not as Steve's replacement, not as some government replica, but as Sam Wilson, that's when I knew Captain America hadn't ended with me. It had grown. He led in a way I never could. He spoke truth in rooms I was never allowed to enter. He looked power in the eye and asked the questions I didn't know how to ask. He reminded the world that the shield isn't about who throws it hardest. It's about who carries it when it's inconvenient, when it's thankless, when it's lonely. Some legacies are carved in stone. Others are passed from hand to hand, softly, without ceremony, like a whisper you carry in your chest. That's what I gave Sam, and he carried it better than I ever did. I still see it sometimes, not in person, but in the footage. Him in the air, wings out, shield in motion, and I don't feel envy. I feel pride, because he didn't become me. He became something new. He made the shield lighter, and that's how I knew it was in the right hand. Not every hero wears the flag. Some wear lab coats. Some wear dog tags. Some wear nothing at all. Just skin and resolve. Some sit beside hospital beds. Some teach kids to stand up straight. Some raise their voices when everyone else has gone quiet. I used to think legacy was about action, about the things we do, the choices we make in the light. But I've lived long enough to see something else. Legacy is also built in the spaces between, in the things we don't do, the moments we step aside, let others rise, let others grow. Natasha taught me that. She wasn't flashy, not in the way people think. She didn't do it for statues or ceremonies. She did it because someone had to, because when the shadows grew too thick, she stepped in, without asking for anything back. I still remember the day we lost her. Vormir. We all assumed I'd go. I was older, heavier with memory, more ready. But she looked at me like I didn't understand anything, and she said, "You still have work to do." Then she looked at Clint, the way only she could, and she jumped. No hesitation, no tears, just purpose. That's what sacrifice really looks like. Not fireworks, not final words, just a choice. Quiet, complete. There are others too. Maria Hill, Phil Coulson, Isaiah Bradley. People who gave everything and were almost forgotten. Almost, but not by me. Isaiah's story broke something in me I didn't know was still holding tight. A man like me, serum in his blood, pain in his past, scars in places no one wanted to see. They hid him, used him, erased him, all because of the color of his skin, and he still stood, still breathed, still lived, even when the world told him he didn't matter. When Sam found him, when he listened, when he lifted Isaiah's truth into the light, that's when I knew the shield was in the right hands. Because he didn't just carry the weight of the stars and stripes. He carried the voices beneath it, the ones history tried to silence. Heroes don't all stand in the light. Some kneel beside the fallen, some stitch wounds in the dark, some keep moving when the weight should have buried them. They don't ask for thanks. They don't wait for applause. They just endure. Peggy used to say that real strength was the ability to hold on long enough for someone else to find their footing. That always stuck with me, because I used to think strength was about standing tall. Now I know. Sometimes it's about kneeling, about reaching back, about holding the door open even when your hands are shaking. I've met gods, aliens, super soldiers, witches, kings, and the ones who left the deepest mark were the ones who stayed human, who chose kindness over control, mercy over revenge, who looked fear in the face and said, "Not today." That's the legacy I hope I leave behind. Not the shield, not the suit, not the title, just the reminder That bravery comes in quiet acts, that heroism is a posture, not a spotlight, and that anyone, anywhere can stand up, even if their voice trembles, even if their hands are empty, even if the world says they can't, especially that. There's a myth that when the war ends, everything returns to the way it was, like time resets itself, like homes rebuild on their own, like people forget how to be afraid. But war doesn't work that way, not the kind we fought, not the kind that snaps half the universe into dust and then brings it all back again. I walk the streets sometimes, quiet neighborhoods, sidewalks lined with sycamore trees, children playing games I no longer understand. Then I listen to the sounds of a world that almost didn't make it. There's laughter again. It took a while. At first, people didn't know how, didn't trust it. Even the ones who returned felt like strangers in their own skin. They came back to homes that had moved on, jobs that had closed, families that had changed. The world was the same, but it had shifted, like trying to slip into a jacket 2 sizes too small. But people are resilient. It's something I've learned again and again. You can't count us out. We mourn, we fight, we rebuild. Sometimes in that order, sometimes not, but always forward. There's a man in Harlem who runs a free clinic. He was gone for 5 years, came back to find his building boarded up, his name erased from the lease. He didn't complain, didn't rage. He picked up a hammer and started fixing it. Didn't wait for a permit, didn't ask for help. Now 3 years later, that clinic's open 24 hours a day. No appointments, no bills, just hope. That's the world we fought for. Not perfect, not polished, but possible. I see veterans too, young ones. Some with limbs that aren't theirs anymore. Some with eyes that haven't stopped scanning doorways. Some with silence wrapped around their shoulders like cloaks. They nod when they see me. Not because I'm Captain America, because they know I understand. The weight, the cost, the ghost that never really leaves. I nod back, not much more to say. Sometimes there doesn't need to be. Sam once said that the hardest part of picking up the shield wasn't the weight. It was the history, the expectations, the pressure to represent something bigger than yourself. He was right. The stars and stripes mean different things to different people, and that's okay. What matters is who's carrying it, why they choose to, and how they treat the people standing in front of them. There's a new captain now, new missions, new threats, new conversation, and I watch from a distance, not because I'm needed, but because I care. Because it matters to me that the world still has someone willing to hold the line. When I was younger, I thought peace would be an ending, the final chapter, the credits rolling. But I see now, peace is a beginning, a choice we make every day, to wake up, to keep going, to believe in something better, even if it hasn't shown up yet. Especially then, I've seen the worst of humanity, the cruelty, the selfishness, the fear, but I've seen the best too. I've seen strangers risk their lives for each other, neighbors carry each other's pain, children light candles in windows because they believe someone somewhere is coming home. You can't bottle that, can't train it, can't program it. It's something deeper, something sacred. The world we fought for wasn't perfect. It still is, but it's worth fighting for. Still, always. Some things I've never said out loud, not because I'm afraid, but because I wouldn't know where to begin. How do you explain what it feels like to lose yourself in a mission so completely that your own name sounds foreign? How do you tell someone that sometimes silence is safer than memory? When the fighting stops, people expect you to smile, to go home, to fit back into the life you left behind like nothing changed. But something always does. You can win the war and still lose pieces of yourself along the way. Small ones. The smell of gunpowder, the sound of a metal door slamming shut, the way your hands won't stop shaking even when there's nothing left to hold. I used to carry those things alone. No one trained us for after. They taught us how to march, how to fire, how to follow order, but no one ever said what to do when the orders run out, when the guns go quiet. The first time I woke up from cryo, I didn't speak for 2 days. Not to the doctors, not to SHIELD, not even to myself. Everything felt too loud, too sharp, like I'd been dropped into someone else's life without warning. I remember standing in Times Square surrounded by lights and noise and color, and feeling completely invisible. Not because no one saw me, because no one knew me. Not anymore. That feeling doesn't leave overnight. It lingers. I learned to live in silence, to find comfort in the steady rhythm of my boots on pavement, the simplicity of a punching bag swinging from a hook, the quiet hiss of a teapot boiling in the early morning. Small things, ordinary things, they matter more than anyone realizes. Sometimes, silence is the only place where healing begins. Bucky understood that better than anyone. We used to sit for hours without saying a word, side by side. Same bench, same view, different ghosts. We didn't need to speak them aloud. The silence said enough. It said, I know. It said, me too. It said, you're not alone. There's a kind of brotherhood that forms in war. It's not about blood, not about uniforms. It's about survival, about knowing someone saw you at your worst and chose to stay anyway. That kind of bond doesn't need words, it just needs time. I've seen therapists, read books, tried breathing exercises. They help. But what helped the most was understanding that I didn't need to be okay all at once, that healing isn't linear. It doesn't move like a checklist. Some days I felt strong, others I felt like I was still buried in the ice, and both were valid. There's a myth that soldiers are fearless, that we move without hesitation, but the truth, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to stand anyway, even when your knees shake, even when your hands sweat, even when your voice trembles. Especially then, I've seen men freeze on the battlefield, not out of cowardice, out of humanity, out of the overwhelming weight of what was being asked of them, and I never judged them, because I knew that weight. I carried it. Some days it still presses on my chest. A familiar pressure, not painful, just present, a reminder that I lived through something the world was never supposed to see. Now in the quiet days, I find peace in the simple things, making breakfast, reading old novels, walking by the lake. I don't need noise anymore. I've had enough of that. Now, I choose stillness, not because I'm retreating, but because I've earned it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is I used to write letters, a habit I picked up in the early days, World War II, before the serum, before the shield, when I was still just a skinny kid with a pen and too many thoughts. I never mailed most of them, didn't think anyone wanted to hear from me, or maybe I was scared of what I'd say. Still, I wrote, sometimes to my mother, sometimes to Bucky, sometimes to people I'd lost, or people I hadn't even met yet. They were part memory, part confession, part anchor, a way to hold on to something when the rest of the world felt like it was slipping away. I remember one in particular. We were holed up in a French farmhouse, just outside Saint-Mihiel. rain tapping against the windows, the smell of gunpowder and wet earth. I found a scrap of paper and wrote by candlelight. The letter was to Peggy. I'd only just met her then, didn't know the shape of her voice when she was tired, didn't know how her fingers curled around a tea mug, didn't know how she'd changed the way I saw the world, but I knew she was strong, I knew she was kind, and I knew I wanted her to know who I was if I didn't make it back. Peggy, I wrote, if something happens to me, tell the world I tried. Tell them I wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest, but I stood, every time, even when it hurt, especially then. I folded it, slipped it into my pack, never gave it to her, didn't need to. Turns out, she already knew. There were others. Letters I wrote and rewrote in my head, to Tony, to Sam, to Natasha, even to Thanos. Words I never had the chance or the courage to speak. To Tony, I wish I'd said it earlier, but I respected you, even when we fought, even when we clashed. You carried more than any of us realized. You built a suit of armor, but you always wore your heart on the outside. To Sam, you're not in my shadow, you're in your own light, and it's brighter than you think. To Natasha, you deserved a monument, but I know you wouldn't have wanted one. You just wanted the job done, and you got it done, Nat. You always did. To Bucky, you're not what they made you, you're what you chose to become after. To myself, you did enough. Let that be enough. I don't know what happened to most of those letters, lost in the shuffle of war, buried under rubble, torn, burned, forgotten, but the act of writing them, that stayed. Sometimes I wonder if the world will ever find those scraps. A field medic in Belgium, a janitor in New York, someone cleaning out an old locker at SHIELD. They'll unfold a yellowed piece of paper, see the handwriting, the creases, the dried watermarks that may or may not be tears, and maybe for a moment, they'll understand a little bit more, that we weren't superheroes, we weren't legends, we were people, scared, hopeful, tired, alive, doing our best in impossible circumstances. If I could leave one letter behind, one that outlived me, I think I'd write it to the kid who's still out there, somewhere, the one who feels small, unseen, too quiet to matter. I'd say, you do matter, not because you're strong, not because you're fast, but because you care, and that changes the world. Maybe one day they'll find that letter, maybe they'll carry it in their pocket, crease it into 4 folds, read it in secret on bad day. Maybe it'll help, even just a little, and maybe that's enough. I never was one for souvenirs. I didn't collect medals, didn't hang certificates on the wall, didn't keep much of anything, really. When you've lived through more decades than you were supposed to, you learn not to get too attached to the material. Time has a habit of peeling those things away, but still there were a few I kept. Quiet things, small things. Things that didn't look like much on the outside, but carried entire lifetimes in their silence. There's a compass. It's old now, scratched, dented, the kind of thing a museum might label damaged, but to me it still works fine, still points north, still opens in the palm of my hand like it did the day I first got it. And inside, tucked into the lid, is her picture, Peggy, hair curled just right, eyes steady, half smile on her lips. I looked at that compass more times than I can count, in the field, in the air, in the silence before battle. She kept me grounded when gravity tried to tear me apart. There's a notebook, brown leather, edges fraying. Inside, pages filled with names, events, bands I missed, books I should read, movies people said were essential. Sam helped me start it. You gotta catch up, Cap, he told me. I took him seriously, worked through the list in order, Some things made me laugh. Some confused the hell out of me. Some made me cry when I didn't expect to. I added notes in the margins, little comments, like I was writing to someone. Maybe I was. Maybe to myself. The version of me that had never heard of the moon landing or Nirvana or Marvin Gaye. That notebook helped me bridge the gap between the world I left and the one I stepped into. There's a dog tag, not mine, Bucky's. I found it in the wreckage, long before I knew he was still alive. It was charred, bent in the middle, the engraving almost worn away. I held on to it for years, not because I thought he'd want it back, but because I needed to believe he was still somewhere, that not everything had been lost to fire and frost, that some part of him remained. There's a patch, small, faded, the Howling Commandos. It was sewn onto Dum Dum Dugan's spare jacket. We found it one night after a raid, cold, soaked through, smoke still clinging to our boots. He tossed me the patch. Sew it into your conscience, Rogers. That's where the real uniform is. I didn't sew it anywhere, just kept it folded in my pocket. Still do. There's a photograph, old and torn at the corner. It's us, the whole squad, standing crooked in the mud, half smiling, half squinting at the sun. Behind us nothing but rubble, and yet somehow we still look proud. I don't look at it often, but when I do, it hits like a punch I don't try to block, because most of them are gone, and I'm still here. I kept the original shield, not the one I passed to Sam, not the one I used in Wakanda. The first one, the round one, paint chipped at the edges, tiny scorch marks near the bottom rim. It hangs in my study, not as a monument, as a reminder of where it started, of who I used to be before the world turned me into something more than a man. They're just objects, pieces of a past I no longer wear on my chest, but every one of them holds weight, not in grams, in memory, in meaning. Sometimes I think about giving them away, donating them, placing them in a vault where someone else can write the story they came from, but I never do, because these things aren't legacy, they're fragments, the bits of a life lived out of order. And when I'm gone, maybe someone will find them, wonder why an old man kept a battered compass and a broken name tag, and a photo faded by time, and maybe that's enough. Maybe they'll feel the pulse of the story still trapped inside, and maybe, just maybe, they'll understand. Some stories don't have endings, not because they don't matter, but because they keep living in the spaces between moments, in the silence between words. When I was younger, I thought every mission had a clear objective: rescue the hostage, secure the perimeter, defeat the villain, check the box, move on. But the older I got, the more I realized how little actually ends. You save one person, there's still another. You end one war, another begins in a different place, with different uniforms, but the same ache. I've learned to live with the unfinished, to accept that not every letter gets sent, not every friendship gets repaired, not every apology gets heard. There's a to-do list on my desk that's 27 years old. The top sheet is yellowed at the edges. The ink is smudged from a morning I spilled coffee in a kitchen I no longer live in. Most of the items are checked off. Some aren't. One line says, "Call Dr. Erskine's family." I never did. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't know what to say. What do you say to the son or daughter of the man who made you into a symbol, who gave you the means to survive, but also tied you to a lifetime of violence? I thought about writing a letter, drafted one 3 different times, ripped them all up. Maybe they didn't need to hear from me, or maybe I wasn't ready to hear myself. There was a sketch I started on a troop transport ship during the war, a pencil drawing of the Italian countryside, winding hills, an old church in the distance. I was trying to remember the quiet we saw between battles, I never finished it. The ship landed before I could finish shading the windows. It's still rolled up in a box under my bed. Peggy and I had a list too. Things we wanted to do once the war was over. Dance in Paris. Take a train across Canada. See the northern lights. We did some. Not all. We never made it to Alaska. But we made pancakes on Sundays. We played cards on the porch until the sun went down. We held hands in the hallway for no reason at all. Maybe that was better. I started writing a book once. Not a memoir. Nothing about Captain America. Just story about people, things I'd seen, things I remembered. I got through 30 pages, then closed the notebook one day and never opened it again. Not because it wasn't worth finishing, but because some stories don't need to be told out loud. There are conversations I wish I could have again, with Tony, with Nat, with Fury, not to fix anything, just to sit, to let the quiet do the talking, to remind them that I was listening, even when I didn't know how to say the right thing back. I wonder what it would have been like to have children. Peggy and I talked about it. We didn't, not in this timeline anyway. Sometimes I see a kid ride by on a bike, laughing at something invisible, and I think maybe I would have been a good father. Then I think maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I had too many ghosts inside me. Maybe peace was the best I could pass on. That's the thing about life. You don't get to finish everything. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means you were human. And that somewhere, someone else will pick up where you left off. I used to be obsessed with completing things. Missions, debriefs, training regimens. But now, I let things be. I let the pencil lines fade. Let the coffee-stained papers curl. Let the list sit on my desk, unfinished and unapologetic. Because the beauty isn't always in the end. Sometimes it's in the pause, the breath between chapters, the note left hanging in a song that never resolves. And if I go before it's all done, that's all right. Sometimes I sit in front of the mirror in the morning and try to find the boy I used to be. He's still there if I look closely enough. The sharp line of the jaw softened, the shoulders broader, the eyes older, but behind all of it there's still Steve. Not Captain America, not the shield, not the speeches or the missions, just Steve Rogers, a kid from Brooklyn, who once couldn't walk 2 blocks without catching his breath. I remember the way my clothes used to hang on me, oversized hand-me-downs stitched at the seams. I remember the way people looked at me with pity, with concern, sometimes with annoyance. I wasn't built for the world the way they wanted me to be, and I hated it. Not because I wanted to be admired, but because I wanted to matter. The boy I used to be, he didn't want to fight because he loved violence. He wanted to fight because he couldn't stand still while someone else suffered. That's all. No medals, no legacy, just a refusal to look away. Sometimes people ask me if I miss him, that smaller, sicker version of myself. The truth, I never stopped being him. The serum changed my body, not my mind. I still doubt, still worry, still walk into rooms wondering if I'm enough. Only now the rooms are bigger, and the expectations heavier. When I first got the serum, I thought I was becoming what I was always meant to be. Stronger, faster, capable. But what I didn't understand yet was that all the strength in the world doesn't shield you from yourself. You can't punch your way out of grief. You can't lift your way past guilt. You can't outrun memory. So yeah, sometimes I miss the simplicity of that old life. The cracked linoleum floors, the radiator that never worked in the winter, The way Bucky used to throw his arm around my shoulder and pretend I wasn't half his size. We had nothing, but we had each other. And back then that was everything. The man I became. He carried that boy with him into every battle. When I stormed HYDRA's facilities, that boy was inside me screaming to protect. When I stood against Tony, that boy whispered not to lose myself in the fight. When I laid the shield down for the last time, that boy told me it was okay to stop, that I had done enough. People see the uniform and forget the frailty. They think the serum erased all weakness, but some things don't leave. I still flinch at loud noises, still lose my appetite when I think too long about the ones we lost. I still cry, though now it comes slower and softer, usually at night, when the windows are open, when the world is quiet. I think we all carry versions of ourselves inside us, the child who dreamed, the teen who failed, the young adult who tried to put the pieces together. Some of those versions grow louder, others fade, but they're always there. I used to think being a man meant moving past who I was. Now I think it means honoring him, letting him speak when I'm scared, letting him rest when I'm strong, letting him remind me that no amount of serum or armor or legend can ever replace the heart that got me here. Sometimes when I walk past a mirror too quickly, I catch a glimpse of him, a flash of boyhood in my eyes, a softness behind the lines, and for a moment, we're the same again, me in the present, him in the past, both of us standing, still trying, still hoping, still refusing to give up. The world saw me as a soldier, a fighter, a shield. But when I think about who shaped me most, who taught me how to be more than a weapon, it wasn't generals, it wasn't scientists, it was women. It started with my mother, Sarah Rogers, a nurse, a widow, a woman who carried the weight of grief without letting it crush her voice. She worked long hours, came home with tired feet, but always had a soft hand on my forehead when I was sick. She didn't raise me to be tough. She raised me to be kind, to pay attention, to speak only when it mattered, and to make it count when I did. She taught me that strength isn't how hard you hit, it's how much you can hold without breaking. After she passed, there was silence, the kind that creeps in around the edges of a room and stays long after the door closes. I filled it with books, sketches, dreams of doing something, anything that would have made her proud. Then came Peggy, Margaret Carter. The first time I saw her, I thought she was like the rest of the army brass. Straight spine, sharpened words, a look that said, "Don't waste my time." But then she spoke to me, not to Captain America, to me, the boy barely out of the alley, with too many doubts and too little confidence. She didn't flatter, she didn't coddle, she challenged me, and I think that's when I fell, not because of her smile, though it never left me, because she looked at me and saw not who I was, but who I could be. She never stood behind me, always beside, in battle, in thought, in the quiet corners of war where the blood hadn't yet dried. We never got the dance, not back then, but she gave me something better, belief, and belief, I learned, is rarer than love. There was Natasha, Nat, Black Widow to the world. To me, just Nat. She was everything I wasn't. Sharp where I was blunt, cool where I was earnest, mysterious where I was open. But beneath it all, she had the biggest heart I've ever known. She carried guilt like armor, regret like currency, but she also carried us, through Ultron, through the snap, through the years when hope was scarce. She never asked for credit, never waited for recognition. She just did what needed doing, even when it cost her everything. I still hear her voice, sometimes, in decisions, in instincts. When I hesitate, she says, "Don't be soft, Rogers. You've seen too much to flinch now." And I don't. Then there's Wanda. You want to talk about strength? She held the man she loved in her arms and chose to destroy him to save the world. And when that was undone, she watched him die again, twice. And still, she stood. She's carried pain that would level gods. And yet she's still learning how to hope. There's power in that, not the kind that bends reality, the kind that chooses to rebuild it anyway. Sharon Carter reminded me of Peggy in the smallest ways, not just in blood, in fire, in loyalty. She didn't ask me to explain myself. She didn't flinch when the world turned its back on me. She hid me, risked everything. Sometimes people say she lived in Peggy's shadow. I don't think so. I think she lit her own path and didn't care who noticed. I think about Maria Hill, about Pepper Potts, about Okoye, women who never wore capes, but bore the burden all the same. They didn't need the spotlight. They were the ones holding it steady for the rest of us. There's a kind of strength people overlook, the kind that doesn't roar, the kind that walks through fire and still makes breakfast the next morning, the kind that doesn't demand to be seen, but refuses to be erased. The women in my life taught me how to fight, yes, but more importantly, they taught me how to stay, how to show up when it's hard, how to listen when there's nothing left to say, how to be still and let someone else lead the way. I owe them more than I can say, and I carry them not in memory, but in motion, in every choice I made, in every stand I took, in every hand I offered to someone else. Their voices echo in my silence, and when I lay my head down at night, I know I didn't build this life alone. There are days I wonder about the other paths, the ones I didn't walk, the versions of my life that stayed folded inside decisions, never unwrapped. What if I'd stayed in Brooklyn? What if I never took the serum? What if the ice never found me? Would I still be Steve, or would I be someone else entirely? I used to think time moved like a railroad track, straight, predictable, one stop after the next. But I've lived too long and seen too much to believe in simple maps. Time is messier than that, more human. It loops, it folds, it stretches in places and disappears in others, and in every loop, there's a version of me I never got to meet. Sometimes I picture him, a thinner version, still sketching in corners of cafes, still hiding his cough behind a sleeve. He works at a bookstore maybe, doesn't say much, but people remember his smile. He knows the neighborhood kids by name. He walks to work in the same pair of boots for 5 years and never complains when the snow soaks through. He goes home to an apartment that smells like old pages and clean laundry, and maybe, just maybe, there's someone waiting for him at the door. Not Peggy, but someone who sees him, truly sees him, and they eat dinner by lamplight, and they laugh at things no one else would find funny, and he never has to swing a punch, because no one ever asks him to be more than he is. I think I'd like that life, but I don't regret this one. There's another road I wonder about, the one where I came back from the ice and chose not to fight again, where I said no when fury came knocking, where I walked past the shield, left it locked behind glass. I could have taken a job somewhere quiet, built furniture, taught history, started over, but I didn't, because even though I was tired, even though the weight was unbearable some days, I couldn't turn my back on a world that still needed defending, even if it wasn't mine anymore, even if I didn't recognize the skyline. The hardest part wasn't saying yet, it was saying goodbye to the life I might have had. The quiet one, the safe one, the one where I grew old without ever knowing what it was like to lose everything. There's a timeline, I know it, where Tony never died, where we sat across from each other in lawn chairs arguing about hot dogs and football, watching our kids play tag in the grass. He'd never admit it, but he'd be the overprotective one. I'd tell him to let the kids scrape their knee, and he'd roll his eyes and say something sarcastic about how old-fashioned I was, and I'd smile, because he'd be alive, and because for once, we'd both have peace. I used to think about writing these versions down, turning them into short stories. Alternate universe, Steve Rogers in the apartment above the bakery, captain of the PTA, Sundays with Stark, but I never did, because they weren't stories, they were dreams, private ones I didn't need to share to believe in. Sometimes when I walk through the woods, I take paths I've never stepped on before, just to remind myself that the road you're on isn't the only one. It never was. I've made choices I'll never undo. Some of them hurt people, some of them saved them, some did both, and I carry them all like a bundle of keys in my pocket, each one unlocking a door that never opened. But that's the price of being human, of being real, of living a life that isn't always clean or clear, or wrapped in a bow. So no, I don't regret the roads I didn't take, but I honor them, because they're part of me, just as much as the battles and the victories and the pain, and maybe in some quiet corner of time, those other versions of me are still walking, still sketching, still loving, still choosing, and I hope they're happy. I've been frozen twice in my life, once in ice, once in time. The first was physical, a long cold sleep beneath the Atlantic, silent, unmoving. The second was harder, because this time I was awake, and everything around me was moving faster than I could keep up with. They say time heals all wounds, but they don't tell you what it feels like when time keeps healing without you. Like watching people rebuild a house you still remember burning. When S.H.I.E.L.D. thawed me out, I opened my eyes into a world that had left me behind. Brooklyn wasn't my Brooklyn. The cars were faster, the clothes thinner, the buildings taller, the people louder. Music came through tiny white cords. Phones didn't have cords at all, and when someone said stream, they didn't mean water. I walked through Times Square and didn't recognize a single billboard. I ordered a hot dog and got handed tofu. I called a cab and a car showed up without a driver. Everything was brighter, louder, stranger, and I was smaller. I found a quiet apartment with a view of the river. I tried to build routines. Same breakfast every morning, same walk in the afternoon, same bench at the park. I talked to strangers just to hear familiar rhythms, but even their smiles felt different, like they were always a little distracted, half listening, half somewhere else. The news moved like lightning, too fast to keep up with. By the time I learned one crisis, there were already 3 more. There was no time to feel, only react. And that was the hardest part. They gave me a therapist. She was kind, soft-spoken, gentle hands, eyes that didn't flinch when I said things like I don't know who I am anymore. She asked me what I missed the most. I said, silence. People think I grieved the people I lost. And I did, but I also grieved the version of me who thought he'd grow old alongside them, the Steve who thought the war would end, and he'd go back to sketching in coffee shops and building furniture in his garage, the Steve who thought his biggest challenge would be asking Peggy to dance, not battling gods, not losing half the universe. I walked into museums and saw my own face behind glass. People took selfies with statues of me. Kids wore t-shirts with my shield on it, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. Not because I was dead, but because the world only remembered the parts of me that were easy to digest. The punch, the pose, The perfect jawline under a helmet, not the silence, not the nightmares, not the nights I stood at the sink shaking because I didn't know how to live a life that didn't need saving. Still, the world kept turning, and eventually I started turning with it. Slowly, carefully, one moment at a time, I discovered jazz hadn't gone out of style. It just moved underground. I found an old diner that still made eggs the way I liked them. I bought a record player, not because it was nostalgic, but because I liked the way it made me slow down, forced me to flip the disc, to wait, to listen. Sam helped more than he knows. He didn't tell me to catch up. He told me to breathe. He reminded me that people don't move on in straight lines. They loop, they stall, they skip chapters and reread old ones, and that's okay. I still didn't fit. Not really, but I stopped trying to squeeze into the mold. I started carving out space of my own. I volunteered at the VA, taught drawing classes on weekends, took long walks where no one knew my name, and for the first time in decades, I stopped bracing for the next fight. The world had moved on without me, but I was still here, and that, I decided, was enough. Before the vibranium, before this circular edge that could cut through air like a whisper, before the symbol was etched into history, there was a sheet of painted metal, flat, colorful, light enough to swing with one hand, and completely useless in a real fight. It wasn't a weapon, it was theater, a prop. The first shield I ever carried was made for a show, a war bonds tour, scripted lines, rehearsed punches, and a marching band behind me. I wasn't even in real gear, just tights that itched and boots that didn't quite fit. They called me the Star-Spangled Man with a plan, but the plan mostly was to smile and sell debt, wave to the crowd, kiss babies, salute the flag. They handed me that red, white, and blue slab like it meant something, and at first I held it like it didn't. Just part of the costume, another layer between me and the truth. The truth being, I wasn't out there fighting. I was performing, for cameras, for newspapers, for cheering crowds who didn't know the real war. Then I went to the front lines, saw real soldiers, saw blood that didn't wash out of fatigues, hands that trembled even when the guns were quiet, eyes that didn't blink right anymore, and they looked at me, not with awe, but with anger, because they thought I was just a mascot, and in a way I was, until I wasn't. Same prop shield, the one built for stage lights and smooth choreo, was the only thing between me and a hail of bullets the day I crossed enemy lines. I didn't think, just ran, used it to block, to dive, to protect the men behind me, who had already given too much. It dented on impact, bent slightly at the edge, but it held, long enough for us to get out. That night, sitting by the fire, I stared at it, this toy, this painted lie, and for the first time it looked like something real, not because of what it was, because of what I used it for. I didn't need a perfect shield. I needed a reason to stand. Eventually, Howard Stark made me the real one, circular, vibranium, balanced, a marvel of science. I remember the first time I threw it, how it came back like it knew the way home, but even then, I kept the old one, folded in a bag, stored away, because it reminded me where I came from, reminded me that symbols don't start with meaning. We give them meaning, with action, with sacrifice, with intent. People talk about the shield like it's sacred, but it's not. It's just what makes it matter are the people who carry it, and what they carry it for. I gave it to Sam because he understood that, He never wanted to be the next me. He just wanted to make the world better his way, with his voice, his compassion, his refusal to let people be forgot. That's what the shield is for. Not to divide, not to dominate, to defend, to endure, to represent those who have no one else standing for them. Sometimes I think about that first shield, where it might be now. Maybe it's in a warehouse somewhere. Maybe it rusted away. Maybe a kid found it and imagined themselves a hero. That'd be fitting, because that's all I ever was. A kid who wanted to protect the ones who couldn't protect themselves. Not because I was chosen, because I chose. People think heroes don't break, that we're made of resolve and steel, that the fire never touches us, that the weight of it all just rolls off. But they don't see the cracks, the silent ones, the ones that creep in slowly behind the eyes, beneath the ribs where armor can't reach. There was a day I almost walked away, not during the war, not when I lost Bucky, not when I woke up to a world I didn't recognize. It was after all that, after New York, after Sokovia, after the Accord, after I watched my team fracture like glass under pressure and I was the one holding the hammer. It was early morning, the kind of gray sky that doesn't promise rain, just the absence of light. I sat on the edge of a bed in a safe house, boots still laced from the night before. Shield leaning against the wall like it was staring at me, mocking me, like even it was tired. I didn't feel like Captain America. I felt like a man pretending, wearing a skin that didn't fit anymore. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the weight, the choices, the loss, the knowledge that everything I stood for, everything I believed in, had started to bend under its own pressure. Tony was gone, not dead, just gone. Across a line I couldn't uncross. Natasha was trying to hold what was left of us together, but even she couldn't stop the drift. Sam believed in me, but I didn't believe in myself that morning. Not really. I stared at the shield for a long time. I thought about leaving it behind, walking out, disappearing into the places no one looks. I had a passport in the drawer, clothes packed, no plan, just the desire to be free from it. Not from responsibility, from expectation, from the noise, from the need to be right when all I felt was wrong. I walked to the door, opened it, took one step outside, then two, and stopped. There was a kid across the street, maybe 9, 10, holding a makeshift cardboard shield, painted crooked, edges torn, red, white and blue bleeding into each other in streaks. He saw me, not Steve, not the man unraveling, but him, the symbol, the idea. He smiled, not like a fan, like someone who just saw something they didn't think was real, like the world made sense for a second. I nodded at him. He waved, shy, hopeful, and I walked back inside, not because of duty, because of him, because if I quit that day, I wasn't just walking away from a uniform, I was walking away from what it meant. The shield wasn't the problem, it was me, the doubt, the exhaustion, the belief that maybe I wasn't enough anymore, but I was, even broken, even tired, because trying still mattered. I didn't leave. I stayed, and the next day, I showed up again, wounds wrapped, head high, still unsure, still heavy, but ready. No one ever saw that moment. No headlines, no battle, no dramatic music, just a man and his silence, and a decision made on a cracked sidewalk, with a crooked smile from a kid who didn't know how close I was to letting go. That's the truth of it. Being a hero isn't about never wanting to quit. It's about choosing not to, even when you. There's a truth about war most people don't talk about. It's not clean. It's not righteous. It doesn't always draw a sharp line between good and evil. It muddies everything, turns belief into blood, turns orders into echoes, turns men into ghosts on both sides. I fought HYDRA, faceless, cruel, mechanical. They wore masks and shouted slogans and experimented on the weak. It was easy to hate them. At first, until I started looking closer, not to forgive, but to understand. There was a man once, a HYDRA officer. We caught him during a supply raid, early in the war. He didn't fight back, didn't beg either. He just sat there, hands in his lap, looking at the dirt beneath his boots. When I asked why he joined HYDRA, he didn't talk about power or ideology. He talked about fear, about how his village had been burned, his family threatened, his choices narrowed down to one terrible path. He said, "They promised me safety." And for a second, just a breath of one, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man trapped, just like so many others, that didn't make what he did right, didn't undo the pain he caused. But it reminded me that every uniform has a story, and not all of them begin with hate. Some begin with desperation. The war taught me strategy, discipline, tactics, but it also taught me to listen, to notice the tremble in a soldier's hand, to understand when someone wasn't fighting out of loyalty, but out of fear of what would happen if they stopped. Bucky, he was on the other side too, not by choice. But does that make the scars lighter, the blood less real? No, what it makes is something harder. Forgiveness. I had to look into the eyes of my best friend and see the man who had pulled triggers under someone else's voice, who had buried his conscience beneath programming and carried the weight in silence afterward. I could have blamed him. Some days I wanted to, but that's not what war needs more of. It needs mercy, not the soft kind, the hard kind, the kind that says, "I see what you did, and I still choose to believe there's something good left inside you." I've watched soldiers from the other side surrender, watched them lay down weapons with hands that shook, not because they were cowards, but because they'd finally remembered who they were before someone put a gun in their hand. The truth is, war doesn't end when the gunfire stops. It ends in the choices people make afterward, in how they rebuild, in whether they carry the hatred forward, or leave it buried with the bodies. I fought Red Skull. I saw what it looks like when ideology consumes a man from the inside out. He didn't want peace. He wanted control, wanted to remake the world in his image, no matter how much blood it took. That's not something you reason with. That's not something you forgive. But he wasn't the only one wearing HYDRA's symbol, and not all of them knew what they'd signed up for until it was too late. I've learned that war never leaves just one kind of wound. There are the ones you can see, scars, burns, missing limbs, and the ones you can't shame, confusion, guilt. Both sides carry them. Every soldier, every survivor, even me, especially me. I still see their faces sometimes, not the ones I lost, the ones I fought, and I wonder what became of them, where they went after the uniforms came off, what they tell their children now, what they remember. Maybe they wonder about me too. Maybe they see my face in old photos, in news clips, in stories passed down like bedtime fables, and maybe they ask the same questions I do. Did we do what we had to? Or did we do what we were told? That's the other side of the war. The quiet one, the one that echoes long after the smoke clears. the one you carry when no one's watching. When I was a kid, peace looked like Sunday mornings. My mother humming in the kitchen, the smell of bread warming in the oven, sunlight stretching across the floor like it was lazy. No alarms, no fear, just quiet. That was peace to me. Then the world taught me otherwise. They said peace had to be earned, that it came through conflict, through hard decisions and harder hands. And for a while I believed them. The war turned boys into soldiers, soldiers into ghosts, and peace became a dream you didn't speak out loud because it felt too fragile to survive the air. After the serum, after the battles, after I became something larger than I'd asked to be, I thought maybe I could fight hard enough to carve peace out of the rubble. Like if I just punched long enough, bled long enough, stood long enough, the world would settle down and let itself heal. But the truth, peace can't be forced. It has to be chosen. That's the part they don't teach you in boot camp or on the battlefield or in the stories people tell afterward. They say peace is what you win, but really it's what you build. Slowly, patiently, one act at a time. I saw more peace in the hands of a nurse cradling a wounded soldier than I ever did in a treaty. I saw it in children sharing a blanket, in strangers passing a canteen in silence, in the moments between gunfire when eyes met and remembered we were human, when the snap happened, when half of everything vanished like smoke. I saw the world learn that lesson the hard way, because without conflict we still didn't know how to be still. We didn't know how to mourn properly, how to comfort each other without agendas, how to sit in the rubble and just breathe. We scrambled, we reorganized, we legislated. But peace, that came later, in pockets, in whisper, a widow planting sunflowers in a crater, a boy rebuilding bicycles for the kids in his block, an old man cleaning headstones not because he had to, but because someone needed to. That's peace. Not banners, not parades. Peace is holding hands at a gravesite. It's sweeping your neighbor's porch. It's choosing to forgive when bitterness feels easier. It's what Natasha carried when she kept the team together after everything fell apart. It's what Sam holds every time he lands with wings wide and words sharper than any weapon. It's what Tony found in his daughter's laugh, what Bruce found in stillness, what Wanda chased through grief, what I only began to understand after I stopped running. The shield isn't peace, it's a promise that someone is trying, that someone is standing between what is and what could be. But real peace, that's the moment the shield isn't needed. Not because the world's perfect, but because enough people care to keep it safe. I think that's why I stepped away. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally saw that peace isn't something I could swing into place. It's something that has to live without me, without heroes, without saviors, just people, good people, trying. I walk now, through towns I never fought in, past fields that remember blood I never spilled, and I see it. Not always, but enough. A little girl painting a mural on a brick wall, a couple arguing over groceries, but laughing by the time they reach the corner, a dog barking for no reason, a flag hung out of habit, not hatred. And I think this is what we were fighting for, not to win, but to give the world a chance to keep choosing better. That's what peace really is, a choice, over and over, and it's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, a whisper, a breath, a door held open, a meal shared, a hand offered, a promise. Tony and I didn't start out as friends. We were different in almost every way. He was loud. I was quiet. He filled every room he entered. I preferred the corners. He questioned authority. I represented it. He called me a fossil. I called him reckless. But beneath all that friction, beneath the jabs and the glares and the silence that often stood between us, there was respect, even when we didn't want to admit it. Especially then. He was the most brilliant man I ever met. But his real genius wasn't in machines. It wasn't the suit, wasn't the arc reactor, wasn't the tech that could rebuild entire cities in a weekend. It was how he felt everything so deeply, how he carried guilt in his chest like it was welded there, how he loved, even when he didn't know how to show it, how he never stopped trying to be better, even when the world gave him every reason to stay the same. I watched him go from a weapons dealer to a protector, from a playboy to a father, from a solo act to someone who'd give his life for a team, for the world. We fought. More than once. Some of it was philosophical. Some of it was personal. Some of it was just fear. He was afraid of what I represented. The standard, the ideal, the weight of legacy. And I was afraid of what he brought into the room. The chaos, the unpredictability, the ego. But the thing about Tony, he never backed down from hard conversations, even when they hurt, even when they cost him. During the accords we split, he stood for control. I stood for choice. We both had a point, but neither of us could say it the way the other needed to hear, and we paid for that, with distance, with pain, with everything that followed. But when it mattered, when the universe shook and time cracked and the end looked inevitable, he was there, suit on, gloves lit, eyes determined, and in that moment, I saw not the man who challenged me, I saw the man who carried us. He didn't hesitate, he didn't stall, he snapped his fingers and changed everything, knowing what it would cost, knowing who he was leaving behind, knowing that his daughter would grow up with stories instead of memories, and he did it anyway. I held his hand as the light left him, said goodbye with my eyes because my throat wouldn't work, and in that silence, I realized something I should have said years earlier. He was the bravest of us, not because of the suit, because of the heart that beat beneath it. He once told me I was stubborn, that I didn't know how to bend. Maybe he was right, but I learned from him that sometimes bending is the bravest thing you can do, that compromise isn't weakness, that change, real change, starts with admitting you don't have all the answers. He taught me that the future belongs to those who build it, not those who guard it. I visit his grave sometimes. It's quiet there, no fanfare, no tourists, just a small plaque beneath a tree. I sit and talk about little things, how Morgan's growing up, how Peter's doing in school, how the world's still spinning, even though it feels a little slower without him in it. I never called him brother, but he was, in every way that mattered. He made mistakes, big ones, but so did I, and in the end we both stood for something larger than ourselves. That's what binds people together, not perfection, but purpose. Tony Stark wasn't just Iron Man, he was the man who reminded me that even a symbol needs a human heart. When I first met Thor, I didn't know what to make of him. A god, a myth come to life. Shoulders like a freight train, eyes like a storm, hair that somehow never got dirty in battle. He walked like he owned the ground, spoke like every word was written in stone, and swung that hammer like it weighed nothing at all. I'd seen arrogance before, but not like this. Then I saw him bleed, and I understood something. He wasn't just a god, he was a man carrying the weight of a crown, and the ghosts of an entire realm. Thor lost more than most people know, not in battles, in silences, his brother, his mother, his father, his home. He watched his planet die twice. He buried more loved ones than I could count, and still, he kept showing up. That's what stuck with me. Not the lightning, not the strength, the resilience, the way he stood again and again. Even when everything in him must have screamed to lie down, he hid his pain behind humor. He drank too much, laughed too loud, but it wasn't emptiness, it was armor, a different kind, not forged in fire but in sorrow. I watched him crumble after the snap. I watched the fire in his eyes go out and the god in him retreat. He blamed himself, carried guilt like a weapon turned inward. If I had aimed for the head, he said, as if 5 words could erase everything he tried to do. But grief doesn't care about logic. It only wants weight. And Thor, he carried it, like Mjolnir, like Stormbreaker, like a crown that never sat right. What I learned from him wasn't about power. It was about permission to feel, to break, to laugh, even when nothing was funny, to mourn, and still matter. He taught me that strength isn't about holding it together. It's about showing up, even when you're in pieces. And he never made me feel small, not once, even when he could have crushed me. Even when I lifted the hammer and saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes, he smiled, not because I proved something, but because he already believed in me. We fought back to back more times than I can count. His thunder, my shield, the sound of impact, like drums at the edge of the world. And in those moments we weren't a god and a soldier. We were brothers, not by blood, by battle. He still calls me Rogers, always in that deep voice, like it echoes through mountains. Sometimes I think he does it to remind me that titles mean nothing, that captain or not, I'm just a man, and that's enough. Thor made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how, made me believe in magic. Not the kind with spells, but the kind with heart. He reminded me that pain doesn't erase joy, that loss doesn't mean love failed. He's still out there, somewhere among stars, flying through galaxies, searching for something only he understands. And I hope he finds it, because if anyone deserves peace, true peace, it's the man who held the storm and never let it crush him. Thor taught me that gods bleed, and that no one, not even a legend, has to carry it alone. Natasha Romanoff was a mystery, even to herself. She moved like a shadow, spoke like a scalpel, and saw more than she ever said out loud. Some people called her a weapon, some called her a spy, some never got close enough to call her anything at all. But I called her friend. Ours wasn't an easy friendship. It was earned, brick by brick, battle by battle, silence by silence. We didn't always agree, didn't always understand each other, but there was trust, solid, unspoken, unshakable. She was the first one to challenge me after I came out of the ice, not with force, with truth, with questions I wasn't ready for. She didn't care about the image of Captain America. She wanted to know the man underneath. She wanted to know what I believed, and whether I could still believe it when things got messy. She taught me how to read a room, how to hear what people weren't saying, how to think 5 steps ahead, and still be willing to improvise on the 6th. But more than tactics, she taught me humanity, in her own way. People think of her as cold, calculated, but they didn't see her in the quiet moment. They didn't see her tending wounds without being asked, checking in when no one else noticed the cracks, staying up late just to sit beside you when the weight got too loud. She never talked about comfort. She became it. There was a moment in Sokovia. We stood on a rooftop as the city started to rise, the air thick with fire and panic. She looked at me, hair tangled, eyes steady, and said, "We save who we can." That's it. 4 words. Simple. Final. They stuck with me because she meant them. Not as an excuse. Not as a limitation. As a truth. We don't always win. But we try, and we don't stop trying. That's what she gave us. A North Star made of grit and compromise and heartache. She wasn't interested in being worshipped. She wanted to do the work, and she did it. Even when no one was watching, especially then. I watched her carry burdens no one else could hold. Watched her bridge the cracks in our team with bare hands. Watched her fight side by side with gods and soldiers and still question whether she belonged. And then, I watched her fall. Vormir. A cliff's edge. A choice. We argued. Begged. Fought. But in the end, she made the only decision she could. She gave herself, not because she wanted to die, because she wanted us to live. I carry that with me. Every day. Not just the grief, the example. She didn't just save the world with that fall, she saved us, all of us. What I learned from Natasha wasn't how to fight. It was how to forgive yourself, even when the past is heavier than your heart can hold. She used to say, "I've got red in my ledger," like it was a sentence, a stain she couldn't wash out. But she did. Not with words, with choices, with loyalty, sacrifice, love. Nat didn't need redemption. She gave it to herself, and she gave it to the rest of us too, whether we asked for it or not. I wish I could talk to her one more time, not to say goodbye, to say thank you. Bruce Banner was one of the kindest souls I ever met, and one of the most dangerous. He never wanted power, never sought it, never craved attention, never wore ambition like a crown. He just wanted to understand atoms, energy, the fragile line between science and humanity. He wanted to heal, and somehow he became the Hulk. I don't think Bruce ever forgave himself for what happened, for the transformations, the destruction, the lives interrupted by his other half. But if you asked me what defined him, it wasn't rage, it was restraint. He was quiet, deliberate, measured in ways most people never saw. He didn't argue unless the stakes were life and death, didn't posture, didn't pretend. He thought before he spoke. He listened even more, and when he finally did say something, you knew it mattered. There were times he scared himself more than he scared us. He'd disappear for weeks, months sometimes, into labs, into mountains, into the deepest places of the self, trying to figure out how to coexist with the thing living inside him. When the rest of us were breaking things, Bruce was building new tech, new theories, new paths forward. He never stopped reaching for solutions, not with fists, but with brain power, compassion, curiosity. He was the one who figured out time travel. People forget that. We talk about Tony, about the snap, about the sacrifice, but Bruce built the bridge, made the impossible work. He walked into the quantum realm like it was just another puzzle, and he didn't do it for glory. He did it because we needed hope. The moment that changed everything for him, when he made peace with the Hulk. I'll never forget it. We walked into a diner looking for Banner. Instead, we found a man larger than life in glasses and a sweater, signing autographs for kids between bites of pancakes. At first, I didn't know how to react, but he smiled. Warm, easy, calm, and I realized he had finally stopped fighting himself. It wasn't perfection, but it was balance, and balance is harder than most people think. What I learned from Bruce wasn't just about intelligence, it was about humility, about owning your broken pieces and still choosing to help, even when you're unsure, even when you're hurting, even when you think you're the problem. He didn't walk away after Tony snapped. He stayed, burned, shaken, but present. He helped clean up the aftermath, held our grief in his giant hands like it was something fragile. He kept going when so many of us wanted to shut down. Bruce taught me that strength looks different on everyone. For some it's a shield, for others it's survival. For him it was peace. He found a way to stop choosing between his halves, and in doing so, he became whole. We don't talk much these days. He's off somewhere quiet, researching, studying, maybe even relaxing, but I like to think he's happy, genuinely, because for a long time he didn't think he deserved to be, and now, he knows better. That's what I learned from him. You can be a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. People talk about the suit like it was armor, a symbol, a uniform, an ideal, and it was, but it was also a burden, not because of what it weighed, but because of what it meant. Red, white, and blue stitched over my chest, a star shining at the center like a target, every thread soaked in meaning I didn't always understand. To some I was a hero, to others a weapon, a propaganda tool, a symbol of a country that hadn't always kept its promises. I wore it because I believed in something, not in the government, not in the military, in people, in the hope that we could be better. But hope isn't easy. It doesn't stitch clean, and some days, wearing that suit felt like trying to stand in a storm, while everyone around you decided what kind of wind you were. There were moments I wanted to take it off, not out of shame, out of exhaustion, because when you wear a symbol, you stop being seen as yourself. You become an idea, a standard, and no one tells you what it feels like to fail in public, to try your best, and still be questioned, still be doubted, still be feared. The accords made it worse. Suddenly, the stars on my chest were under a microscope. Everything I did, every mission, every move, was political. The suit didn't change, but the meaning behind it shifted, and I had to decide if I still fit inside it. I remember looking in the mirror before walking out for a press conference. The suit felt tighter than usual, not in fabric, in purpose. Was I still a leader, still a voice worth following, or just a relic in colors too bold for the moment? That's when I understood something I hadn't before. The suit doesn't make the man defines the suit. It only meant something because of the choices I made while wearing it. Not the victories, not the speeches, the moments I chose to stand when it would have been easier to sit down. The times I listened instead of command, the times I let go instead of holding on too tightly. Sam understood that better than anyone. That's why I gave it to him, not just the shield, the suit, the whole legacy, because he could carry it further than I could, with more nuance, more truth, more heart. He didn't want to wear it at first, didn't think it fit, and maybe it didn't, not in the beginning, but then he made it his, rebuilt the seams with his own story, and suddenly, those colors looked brand new. The suit never belonged to me, not really. It belonged to the people watched, the ones hoping for something steady, something brave, something honest. I was never Captain America because I wore the suit. I was Captain America because I kept showing up, even when I was scared, even when I was wrong, even when I didn't know what the next right move was. I kept going, and that, more than the shield, more than the stars, was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Now the suit hangs in a glass case somewhere, museum lighting catching the edge of the star, kids pointing, parents explaining, but to me, it's just fabric, worn, faded in places, sweat and memory stitched into every seam. And if someone asks what it meant to me, I'd say this: it meant I tried, with everything I had, and I never stopped believing that people were worth protecting, even when they didn't believe in them. It's never the big things you miss, not the battles, not the headlines, not the applause or the ceremony or the mission logs filed in some government archive. It's the quiet, the moments that slipped through like sand in your palms because you didn't know you were supposed to hold on to them. I miss the mornings, not the rushed ones before deployment, the slow ones, when the sky was soft, when the kettle hadn't yet started to whistle, when the sunlight came in at just the right angle and turned the dust into glitter. That was peace, and I didn't know it at the time. I miss laughter, real laughter, the kind that makes you drop your fork at the table, the kind that starts in the lungs and ends with someone gasping for air. I miss how Bucky used to poke fun at me for how seriously I took everything, how Nat would deadpan a joke, wait a beat, then smirk when it finally landed, how Sam could get anyone to laugh, even Bruce, even me. I miss music on vinyl, the crackle of the needle, the imperfections, the way it demanded you listen, because skipping ahead meant getting up and turning the whole thing over. I miss phone calls, not texts, not pings, not emergency alerts from Stark's latest security protocol, just ringing, one voice, one moment, hearing someone breathe on the other end. I miss the smell of old books, the kind you find in back corners of forgotten libraries, spines cracked, notes scribbled in margins by strangers long gone, stories within stories. I used to get lost in those, still do sometimes, but it's different now, less escape, more echo. I miss Peggy's laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was full. She used to cover her mouth when something genuinely caught her off guard, like the joy surprised even her. I think that's what I miss most, the surprise, the way small things used to feel like discoveries. These days things are predictable, routine, and I don't mind it. Routine has its own kind of comfort, but every now and then, I find myself looking at a familiar street and wondering if it used to look different, not in brick or paint, in feeling. I miss dancing, not the skill, I was never great at it. I miss the way it felt to hold someone in a quiet room while music played low in the background. No war, no urgency, just rhythm, just presence. I miss the team. God, I miss the team. The way we'd argue in briefing, the way we'd sit around after a mission, bruised, sore, joking like we hadn't almost died a few hours ago. The way Tony would invent some new tech mid-conversation, and Clint would roll his eyes so hard it looked like a full-body workout. I miss the mess of it, the dysfunction, the honesty, the fact that even when we didn't agree we still chose each other. I miss trust, not the earned kind, the assumed kind, the feeling of knowing someone would catch you if you fell out of a Quinjet, or fell apart in a hallway. I had that once, with them, with her, with myself, and maybe that's the hardest thing to say out loud. I miss who I was when I didn't question everything, when I believed the world could be fixed if I just tried hard enough. I know better now, but that doesn't make the missing stop. Sometimes I sit on the porch, eyes closed, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, and I imagine they're still here, all of them, just out of sight, just one step behind the door, and for a minute, a single, quiet, precious minute, the world feels full again. You'd think a man would remember every second of the end, but war doesn't slow down when it's about to close. It speeds up, becomes a blur, flashes of heat, of noise, of faces straining against time itself. I remember the portal, the wind, the sudden stillness before chaos ripped through the field. And I remember one thought, simple, quiet, this is it. We'd come from everywhere, every timeline, every scar and burden we thought we'd bury. And we stood there, shoulder to shoulder, against something that looked like the end of everything. It wasn't just Thanos, it was doubt, grief, anger, regret, all of it manifest in the shape of an enemy who never blinked. There was a moment before the charge, a breath, a heartbeat where everything held still, and I tightened the straps on my shield, broken, but still with me, scarred, chipped, like me, and I whispered 3 words into the air, I'm not done. Then we ran. The field exploded around us, screams, thunder, spells cracking against the sky. I couldn't see everyone, but I felt them. Wanda's fury unraveling reality around her. Peter swinging like the world depended on it. T'Challa moving with grace that bent time. Tony, just ahead of me, focused like the storm could hear him think. Thor, lightning in his veins, his eyes locked on Thanos with a rage I'd only seen once before. We weren't coordinated. We didn't need to be. We were one purpose. I fought like it was the first day, like I still had something to prove. But this time it wasn't to the world, it was to myself, to the kid who got beat up in alleys, to the soldier who left Bucky behind, to the friend who couldn't stop Tony from walking away. I fought for all the moments I thought I'd failed. Thanos was inevitable. That's what he said. But nothing is inevitable when people choose to stand, even when it hurts, even when you're outnumbered, even when everything in you is screaming to run. You stay. I don't remember every blow, just the exhaustion, the ache, the blood in my mouth, and the certainty that this was where I'd fall. And I was ready, truly, because if this was it, if this was the price, it was worth it, for them. But then, the voice, on your left, Sam, alive, hope in 3 syllables, and the world opened, portals tore the air apart, and they came, every face, every ally, every friend, the people we thought we'd lost, the ones who refused to stay gone, and suddenly I wasn't alone. I stood taller, lifted the broken shield, tightened my grip, and I gave the only order I ever needed. Avengers, assemble. We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we chose each other, because we believed even at the edge of loss, that unity could undo destruction. Tony made the final move, snapped his fingers, burned himself into legend. I held his hand as the light left him. No helmet, no armor, just Tony, just a man. Afterward, I didn't celebrate. I sat beside the rubble, surrounded by victory, and felt the weight of every sacrifice, every name we wouldn't say again, every story that ended so others could continue. That was the final fight, not because there wouldn't be more, but because for me, that was the end of the line. No one tells you what comes after the noise, after the battle, after the world stops needing you in the same way. There's no briefing, no orders, no clean ending, just space, time, a silence so deep it echoes inside your chest. And for someone like me, someone who was built to stand, to move, to protect, that silence was the hardest battlefield. After Tony's funeral, I remember standing alone near the lake. Everyone else had gone. Pepper, Rhodey, Peter. Even Thor had lifted into the sky, eyes still wet, voice uncharacteristically quiet. But I stayed, watched the sun ripple across the surface, watched the trees sway like they were exhaling for the first time in years, and I thought, what now? For so long I was part of something larger, the war, the Avengers, the cause. I gave everything to that rhythm, every breath, every bruise, every dream I didn't allow myself to chase, because there wasn't time. There was always something more urgent, more broken, more important. But in the quiet after Endgame, I realized I had a choice I'd never truly had before. I could stop, not because I was defeated, because I'd finally done enough. The time machine, it was meant for one last mission: return the stones, put everything back in place, close the loop. That was the plan. But I had another loop to close, a promise, a dance, a life that had waited for me while I chased everyone else's emergencies. Returning the stones took time, not just minutes, time in all its dimensions. Each place I visited reminded me of who I'd been, what I'd lost, what I'd given, but also of what I still might have. When it was over, I didn't come back. Not right away. I stepped sideways into another kind of life, a quieter one. I found her, Peggy, older, wiser, still Peggy, still that fire in her voice, still the steadiness in her eyes that had once told me, without needing to say it, that I could be more. We danced, not in a fancy hall, not in front of anyone, just us, in the living room, a record spinning in the corner, crackling with old warmth. I didn't say much, didn't need to, because in that moment, I wasn't Captain America, I was Steve, just Steve, and that was enough. We built a life, small things, Sunday papers, rain on the window, tea at dusk. She worked. I stayed out of sight, helped in small ways when no one was looking, not because I needed to be a hero, because I wanted to be a husband, a partner, a man who finally let himself breathe. Some days I'd sit on the porch, watching the street, kids riding bikes, birds landing on power lines, leaves catching the wind like little flags of freedom, and I'd think, this is what we fought for, not the politics, not the monuments, the simplicity, the right to live without fear, to grow old, to exist without having to prove anything. And I did grow old, slowly, gracefully, pain in the knees, creases around the eyes, hair graying at the temples, but it didn't scare me. It comforted me, because aging meant I was still here, still choosing, still loving. Eventually I knew it was time to pass the torch, not because I was weak, because I was ready. I gave Sam the shield, and with it, my blessing, my trust, my belief that the world still needed someone to stand tall, but it didn't have to be me anymore. And now I sit with the sunset, write letters I may never send, sketch trees that don't need to be remembered to matter, and I think, this is peace, not a finish line, not a final mission, just what comes after, and I'm grateful for it, every sec. I'd thought about it 1,000 times. The music, the way her hand would feel in mine, where we'd be, a ballroom, a porch, a dream, the dance I promised, the one I owed her, the one time and duty and war had stolen. And when it finally came, it wasn't grand, it was simple, which made it perfect. The day I returned the last stone, I didn't come back. I stepped sideways into a life that could have been, that should have been, and she was there. She opened the door like she knew I was coming, didn't speak, didn't blink, just looked at me with eyes that had waited, eyes that still held the fire of every mission, every speech, every moment she led without ever needing to raise her voice. She reached out, touched my face, and nodded once. We didn't talk about the years we missed. We didn't need to. They were there, in the silence between our words, in the way she leaned into me without hesitation, in the way I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for decades. The dance happened on a Tuesday, late afternoon, the air soft, the window cracked open, a record player humming something old and slow, her favorite, something with strings and swing. She stepped into the room with bare feet, took my hand, no ceremony, just music and memory, and time folding in on itself, like it was finally forgiving us. I'd never been much of a dancer. Back then my feet were too big, my confidence too small. But that day I wasn't nervous, because it wasn't about getting the steps right. It was about being there, really being there, with her, in a room that didn't need an audience. In a moment we'd been chasing across timelines and heartbreaks. We swayed, no dip, no spin, just the steady rhythm of two hearts finally beating in sync. I closed my eyes, listened to her breathing, felt the way her thumb traced the edge of my wrist in time with the music. And for the first time in my life, I felt complete. Not whole because I'd filled in the gap, whole because I'd stopped trying to. Because in that moment, I was enough. Not as a soldier, not as a symbol, just as Steve, her Steve. She rested her head on my shoulder halfway through the song, whispered something I still hear in quiet moments. You're home now, and I was not in a house, not in a timeline, in her arms, in that song, in the life we made out of the time we had left. We danced until the record ended. Then we danced in the silence, because the music was just an excuse. The real melody was in the way she looked at me, the way our hands fit tighter like they'd always known how. Sometimes I wonder what the world would have looked like if I'd stayed with her the first time, if I'd taken that dance back in the 40s, if I'd never crashed that plane, if I'd never become a headline. But then I remember, it had to happen this way. I had to become who I became, so I could appreciate this moment, so I could know what it meant to stop fighting and just be. The dance wasn't a reward, it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, of rest, of knowing that love, real love, waits, and when you find it again, it's like time forgives you. We still danced, sometimes, later, older, slower, but that first one, that was every. Letting go wasn't the hard part. Knowing how to, that was what kept me up at night. I carried that shield for so long, it stopped feeling like a tool and started feeling like a limb. Something fused to me, something people expected to see when they looked at me. But it wasn't mine forever. It never was. The shield belonged to an idea, and that idea was bigger than me, bigger than Brooklyn, bigger than any one man. It was about belief, in justice, in courage, in compassion, in the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. I knew Sam would hesitate. I knew he'd look at it and see all the things it symbolized, not just the good, also the contradictions, also the weight, also the history. That's why I chose him, because he saw all of it, and didn't look away. The day came without warning. I woke early. My hands felt older than usual, weathered, still strong but softer. I sat with the shield across my lap for a long time, traced the edge with my thumb, thought about every place it had been, the walls it had broken, the lives it had saved, the burdens it had carried without complaint, and I whispered something to it. Thank you. I didn't go back through the machine, didn't return to the platform. Bruce and Bucky and Sam stood there waiting, staring at empty space, not knowing I was already just behind the trees, older, wiser, ready. Sam was the first to notice me, turned slowly. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition, to something I'll never forget. Respect, not for the captain, for the man. I handed him the shield with both hands, watched him take it like it might break in his grip. It feels like it belongs to someone else, he said, and I told him the truth. It doesn't. He didn't ask why I picked him. He already knew, because he had stood when others sat, because he had spoken up when silence was easier, because he believed in people, not power. He didn't have the serum, didn't need it. His strength was different, quieter, more patient, more human. Bucky stood behind him, nodded once, approval without words, a kind of blessing, a passing of the torch between brothers who had shared too much loss to pretend anything about it was simple. Sam ran his fingers along the rim of the shield, the star, the stripes. He didn't smile. He stood still, like the moment had to pass through him before he could carry it forward. I sat beside the lake after, shieldless, and for the first time in what felt like 100 years, I didn't feel incomplete. I felt light, not because the shield was gone, because it was where it needed to be. That's what legacy really is. Not something you protect in a vault, not something you hoard out of fear. It's something you give away with open hands and a full heart. And if you've done it right, it lives on stronger than you ever were alone. Sam didn't become me. He became him. Captain America, yes, but also Sam Wilson, Falcon in spirit, voice of a new world, bridge between history and what comes next. That's how it should be. That's how it has to be. Some burdens don't come with scars. They come with silence, with sleepless nights, with memories that replay in perfect detail, even when you beg them not to. People see the shield. They see the victories, the stance, the headlines, but they don't see what we carry after the battle ends. I used to think the hardest weight was the physical, holding a line, taking a hit, pushing back when it felt like the whole world was pressing forward. But over time, I learned the heaviest things are the ones you can't set down. Guilt, regret, the quiet moments when you wonder if your best wasn't good enough. The names you remember long after everyone else has forgotten. The ones you couldn't save. The ones you almost did. There was a medic in Belgium, young, barely out of school, bright eyes, steady hands. I remember him not because he died, but because he didn't. Because he lost his arm saving someone else, and when I visited him later, he smiled and said, "I'm just glad I had the chance." And I thought, how do you carry that? That level of sacrifice, of humility, of unshakable grace. I've carried loss before. Friends, brothers, time itself, but I've also carried doubt, the kind that whispers when the room is quiet. Did I do enough? Did I say the right thing? Make the right call? Step in fast enough? Or did I hesitate? Was I too hopeful? Too trusting? I've stood in front of mothers and tried to explain why their sons weren't coming home. I've shaken the hands of politicians while knowing the people who deserved the credit were already 6 feet under. I've worn medals I didn't feel I'd earned, and turned down ones I did. That's the way, not the shield, not the mission, the knowing that people believe in you, even when you barely believe in yourself. Sometimes Sam and I would talk about it. He'd say, people think this job is about saving lives, but a lot of the time, it's about carrying the ones you could. He wasn't wrong. He never is. I look back at my decisions and I try not to flinch. Some of them broke things. Some of them broke people. Some of them broke me. But I made them, and I live with them. Every day, there's weight in leadership, not just responsibility, but visibility. Every word you say echoes farther than you intend. Every silence speaks volumes. People look to you for direction, for clarity, for certainty, and sometimes you just don't have it. You're guessing, grasping, hoping, and you wear the uniform anyway, because if you don't, who will? That's what I tried to teach the ones who came after me. That strength isn't about certainty, it's about commitment, about standing even when your legs shake, about owning your choices, and making peace with the fact that peace might never fully come. The weight doesn't go away, but it gets lighter when you share it, with a friend, a teammate, a partner, even just by saying it out loud. So that's what I'm doing now, not because I want to be free of it, because someone else out there is carrying something heavy, and maybe hearing this makes it feel just a little less crushing. You're not weak for feeling the weight, you're strong for still standing beneath. I didn't send many letters, not because I didn't write them. I wrote plenty, dozens, maybe hundreds over the years, but most stayed folded in drawers, tucked into books, filed away in my head. Some words feel safer kept close, too raw, too real, but every once in a while, I sent one, and when I did, I meant every word. One of the first was to Bucky, the real Bucky, not the Winter Soldier, not the ghost HYDRA made him carry, the man I grew up with, the man who used to jump off rooftops just to land beside me. I wrote it after Wakanda, after we brought him back again, really back. I handed it to him without saying anything. He read it in silence, then looked up and just nodded. That was enough. Inside I'd written, "You were always more than what they did to you. I never forgot. I never stopped believing you'd find your way home. And I'll always be here when you need to rest." I wrote to Peggy too. Even after we found each other again, I kept writing her notes. Little ones, tucked into books, left on the kitchen table, sometimes just a line or two. "You still wrinkle your nose when you think. The tea tastes better when you make it. Thank you for the years we made count." She never said much about them. She just kept them, every single one. I wrote a letter to Tony's daughter. I never gave it to her. I gave it to Pepper, sealed. She didn't open it while I was there, just took it with both hands and said thank you. Inside was everything I wished I'd told her father and everything I hoped she'd grow up knowing. "Your dad was the most brilliant mess I ever knew. He was stubborn and selfish and brave and better than he thought he was. He saved all of us. You should be proud. I am." I wrote to Sam, after I gave him the shield, not because I thought he needed guidance, because I wanted him to know I saw him. "You carry things I never had to, and you do it with grace. You're going to lead in a way that looks different. That's good. The world needs new hands holding the shield." I wrote to Nat once, long before the fall. I left it in her locker at HQ. I don't even know if she read it. It wasn't long. "You don't owe anyone redemption. You already made the world better just by choosing to be in it." I sent one to Fury too. "No sir, just Nick. Just honesty. You saw something in me when I didn't know who I was anymore. You gave me a direction, then trusted me to walk it. That's rare. Thank you." He never responded, but I didn't need him to. Sometimes letters are for the writer more than the reader. Sometimes they're an anchor, a confession, a mirror. A way to say what your voice can't carry in the moment. I wrote one to myself once, folded, left it inside my old army journal, forgot about it for years. When I found it again, it said, "You're doing better than you think. You've made mistakes, but you kept your heart. Keep going." If someone finds these letters one day in a trunk, in an attic, in a dusty box beneath an old bed, I hope they don't see them as relics. I hope they see them as reminders that even people like me doubted, feared, loved deeply, and tried so damn hard to get it right. It wasn't a dramatic day. No explosions, no news broadcasts, no calls from command, just sunlight, just warmth, just quiet. I woke up early, the way I always had. Old habits don't break even when the war is long over. But that morning, I didn't rise like a soldier. I stayed in bed a while longer. The sheets were soft. The air smelled like coffee and lemon and the faint trace of lavender from Peggy's favorite lotion. She wasn't beside me. She was already up, humming in the kitchen, a song I couldn't place, but had probably heard 100 times. And that sound was peace. I walked barefoot down the hall, pausing to touch the photos hanging there. No medals, no flags, just life. Us on a porch swing, a candid shot of me reading while she napped in the sun, one of Sam, awkwardly holding the shield the first time I gave it to him. Memories, not moments. That's how I wanted to be remembered. In the kitchen, she turned and smiled. "Morning," she said, like it hadn't been decades since the world first tore us apart. I kissed her on the forehead, poured my own coffee, and we sat by the window. No words, just bird song, sun slicing through the curtains, steam rising between our cups. She reached across the table, laid her hand on mine, and squeezed once. We didn't need to talk about what day it was. We didn't need to say goodbye, because we'd been saying hello for years after a lifetime of waiting. I took a walk later, same road I always did, down by the post office, past the bookstore where the clerk never asked questions, through the park, with the crooked bench we once carved our initials into. It was spring. Everything was blooming, like the world had decided to be gentle again. Children chased each other between trees. A couple laughed on a picnic blanket. Someone strummed a guitar, badly but with heart. And I thought, this is what we fought for. Not parades, not speeches. This, a world that could forget to be afraid. I sat on that bench for a while, ran my fingers over the faded carving. I wrote a note on the back of a receipt I found in my coat pocket. Tell them I was happy. Folded it once, left it beneath the bench. Not because I thought someone would find it, but because I needed the world to know. When I got home, Peggy was waiting on the porch, 2 glasses of lemonade. She'd aged gracefully, stronger than ever. The years had only sharpened her kindness. And me, I was tired, but not in the way I used to be. This was a good tired, the kind that comes after a life lived all the way through. We sat together as the sun dipped low, her head on my shoulder, my fingers laced with hers, and I whispered something I hadn't said enough. "Thank you." She looked up. "For what?" she asked. "For everything," I said. That night we danced again. No music, just the rhythm of the past falling away, and the present holding still, long enough for us to savor it. I knew I didn't have many mornings left, but that one, that last one, it was perfect. And when the world woke again the next day, it didn't need me anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, that was okay. I always knew there'd be an end. Not the dramatic kind. Not a fall from the sky or a final stand in the dirt. Just stillness. A moment when the fight would leave my hands, when my breath would grow soft and the world would carry on without me. That's the part no one talks about. The after. There's a peace in knowing you did all you could. Not everything right, not without regret, but all you could, and I did. I gave it everything. My youth, my fear, my faith, my body, my name, my shield. I didn't always understand the weight of it, what it meant to be a symbol, to wear that star, to stand when everyone else sat. At first I thought it was about bravery. Later I learned it was about choice, over and over. Every day choosing to believe in something bigger than myself, choosing to care, even when it hurt. They'll write stories they already had about the serum, the shield, the battles, but that's not what I want remembered. I want them to remember the moments in between, the quiet choices, the times I failed and kept going, the hands I held after the fight, the words I spoke when I didn't know if they'd land. I want them to remember Bucky's laughter, Sam's steady eyes, Natasha's smirk when she saw right through you, Tony's heart, no matter how much armor he wrapped it in, Peggy's voice in the morning saying my name like it had always belonged to her. And I want them to remember that none of this was easy. It wasn't fate, wasn't destiny, it was a choice. Every morning I got up, every time I picked up the shield, every moment I stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. That's the truth of it. That's the legacy, not perfection. Persistence. I used to say, I can do this all day, and for a long time I did, but even I knew eventually the day would end. I don't know what comes next, if anything does, but I hope, wherever I go, it's a place where the fight is over, where the sky is wide, the wind is kind, and the weight is gone. Maybe I'll see them again, in some way, in some form, not in costume, not in crisis, just us, laughing, talking, living. If anyone finds this, if you're still listening, know this. You don't need to be a hero to make a difference. You just need to care, deeply, quietly, unshakably. Care when it's inconvenient. Care when it hurts. Care when no one else will. That's how the world changes, not through shields, through hearts. I've reached the end of the line now, and I'm not afraid, because I walked it all the way through, because I stood when it mattered, because I loved, because I lived, and because I let go when it was time. Goodbye for now. Be kind, be brave, and remember, even when the world feels dark, someone somewhere is still standing in the light, just like I did, just like you can always.